Now call this monthly meeting of the MRH Board of Education to order at 7:01 on August 17th, 2023. If you could all please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Do we have any sign-ups for public forum?
We do not.
Thank you. Can I get an approval on item 2.01, the consent agenda?
Move to approve the agenda as presented.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Item 3.01, construction change orders with Chris Holzer.
Good evening, everyone. We do have a couple of items on the change order for this month. We installed a roof hydrant, which is a fancy way of saying we put a hose bib or a hose connection up on top of the roof so that our operations crews can keep our rooftop units clean. We deleted some skate stoppers on the new poured bench down in the new commons. We made some repairs in the choir area. We got a credit to remove some work that we had planned that we decided not to do in the end, so that's a sizable credit there. We used a waterproof air barrier on the gym lobby because we had wet weather coming, and there were a number of doors that were old that were in the immediate vicinity of spaces where we had new doors going in, so we are updating those doors to match so that everything looks nice, clean, and finished. So those are the change orders for the month. $8,650.25 is the net sum of that.
Are there any concerns we have going into Monday with the project? Are we ready for students?
No, I think we're in good shape. Mike?
And we're still tracking for our completion date?
Talk about that when we get to the construction.
All right, sorry to jump ahead. Other questions? Okay. Item 3.02, bus routes for 2023-24.
So as I learned 2 months ago, we actually have to have the bus routes approved twice a year, and I didn't quite understand that, but now I do, because as we have set the bus routes, we are getting some requests for changes from different stakeholders. So those are still things that we continue to look at, even going into the last couple days, as we're getting communication from families. So as you see in board docs, there are the proposed routes, and we are ready to go on Monday with those. But also knowing that there may be some tweaks throughout the year, and then that's why we will re-present those towards the end of the year.
Sorry, Dr. Dietrich. I know that last year we had implemented an app around tracking the buses that I think had mixed reviews. Is that still being used this year?
That is still available to us.
Okay.
We've actually dug into the different apps that are available through technology. So that app is still available. We actually have an app that also tracks driver habits. So that is something we've been looking at as well. And we've also been able to use that to create our bus rosters instead of the secretaries in the building having to do all of those by hand. We've been able to do those out of the transportation department and limit the amount of legwork that our buildings have to do.
Okay. And as we're easing into the school year next week, and bus routes and new times at stops and things like that, should anyone, not going to happen, but should anybody have any issues next week, in the morning, is there a particular person they should contact?
So I would say if they're having issues as they should contact their building first.
Okay.
We will be in communication with them, and we'll be able to respond as needed.
Thank you.
Other questions? Thank you.
Okay.
3.03, Board Policy Batch 2023B.
Good evening, board and community. Tonight I bring forth 5 policies as a result of changes to MSIP 6. These 5 policies are related to Senate Bill 681 around assessing literacy skills for students and also implementing literacy plans for students. A few of these policy also includes changes to summer school for reading instruction for those students who may need it, and then also the removal of language that indicates the school districts can actually claim the attendance minutes for summer school if a student has to receive summer school as a result of their assessed reading level. The last policy that's coming forth is around retention and promotion. Again, this policy outlines the requirements of the district to either add summer school or additional reading instruction, which takes place in our ECC and our elementary school with our current positions identified through our reading specialists. This item is going to come back at a later date for action. Are there any questions?
I have a question about policy IND, the ceremonies and observances policy. I was unaware of the level of the weeds that this Senate bill got into. I mean, always a little surprising, the things that specifically make it in, although very supportive of a Holocaust Education Week. Do we have a sense of if this new mandate actually matches with existing curriculum?
So, Dr. McGee?
So the good news about this is work that we already do. So while this looks to be a new thing, we will be looking for new ways to bring in a refreshed look at the Holocaust. But we already honor this through a number of different spaces in our curriculum, and see as our current alignment already meets these expectations.
DESE does actually provide resources too for school districts if they want to utilize them. Again, not sure the quality of the resources, but they are available.
I have a question for Dr. McGee, actually. When we go through our literacy plan, is it, or does it encompass room for not just the minimum standards, but to say that, okay, you know, this is what the standard is, but we're really trying to get to here instead of just stay here? I mean, is there room in the current plan for that, or is it we just try to stick to one sort of static measurement?
Well, what the plan really works for us to do is develop procedures at which we identify to ensure that no student falls through the cracks. So the plan not only allows our reading specialists and our literacy coach to work with our classroom teachers, but also helps us develop some of those systems where we use our assessments and our benchmarks to help us identify kids through a PLC process to provide the correct level of tiered support to meet their needs. And that tiered support, we need to make sure that we're not constantly thinking about that as a deficit model, but also as an opportunity for enrichment and extension for our kids. So just we keep trying to educate both our community and our staff that there are 2 sides to the tiered support pyramid, and that does not just include remediation, but also enrichment and extension.
I think also the entry and exit criteria that Vince Estrada and Lauren Weiser are working on allows us to ensure that students are moving fluidly and that they're not actually stuck in a particular intervention as they go through. And that's critical because typically when a student enters, they don't have an opportunity to exit. And so we want to make sure that we are responding to the needs of students. But the goal is to have all students to read at or above grade level, and the goal is to have at least 1 year's growth. And I do think that we have the correct staffing in building, whether it's instructional coaches assisting teachers with coaching around implementation of reading strategies, or students actually being assisted through the reading specialists.
Are these reading success plans defined by DESE or MSBA or whoever?
Yes, they've given us initial criteria. So we are currently working to develop our internal structures to make sure that what we have aligns with that, and then we've got the opportunity to update our community should a child need that additional level of support.
I think I'm getting mixed up between the dyslexic assessment and literacy, that we were already doing a second grade, but this is different.
Yeah, I would think of this as literacy concept as an umbrella in which dyslexia is one of the pieces underneath it. That screening is a part of our literacy plan and also leads us to a reading success plan should a child receive need additional support and intervention.
So to your question, Rachel, if a student is screened for dyslexia and they're identified as being at risk, they also have to have a reading success plan too. So it's not just for a student who's struggling with reading, it could be a student who's at risk for dyslexia.
And we have already been doing the dyslexia assessment,
Yes.
so we're already on that path.
Yes.
Correct.
Great.
Oh, I have one other question. So I know that the teachers are going to be doing this plan, but what happens? What should a parent do if they are concerned about their kids falling behind, or I mean, not to say that the teachers aren't noticing, but if a parent has a specific concern, who should they contact about that?
Always start with your classroom teacher. That's the relationship that we want to build between the home and the school, and that classroom teacher can then potentially access additional benchmarking or assessment for the child, or better explain the tools that we already have to the family to alleviate potential concerns.
So I would also add, for example, like the ECC has problem-solving teams. All of the buildings have a form of a problem-solving team, and we are working to have continuity across all of the buildings. But parents are invited and engaged to be a part of that conversation, because I think sometimes the idea is that parents don't have anything to contribute, which is erroneous. But they can say, here are the strengths of my child, or here's what I observe and see at home. And then the parent is a part of developing that plan, and then also given resources to implement at home if they so choose to do so.
Other questions about the policy batch? All right. We will move ahead to food service updates, item 3.04. That's you, yeah. Dr. Dietrich.
Come here, Chris. Nope. So I was asked tonight to come for a couple of reasons. One is the MRH food service meal prices for 23-24. Keep talking. You're doing great. Thanks. Appreciate the positive reinforcement. I need 5 of those for every negative one. Okay. All right. But it would be nice to have it so I could show them. So ideally what we are looking at is a proposal for this year to increase student lunch prices by 10 cents, adult lunch prices by 25 cents. I would like to give open floor to Mr. Holzer if I say anything wrong, because he's been doing this for quite a few years. He's been great at helping me through this the last week and a half. So there are some numbers here where there might be questions where I'm not able to fully answer. And I also understand that I can only do that for 1 year, is to play that this is the new guy card. Okay. So I really need my slides. The thing that I would point out if it was up here is that it shows an increase for free meals as far as money that we would be losing on reimbursement. 220. We are losing provision 2, which means we're not able to provide free breakfast to students who are reduced or full pay. Okay, so there's a significant difference there. If the district were to maintain free breakfast, I know this was a question I think came from Mr. Miller, what the impact would be financially for the district. We were able to run those numbers, and we would be looking at roughly around if we take the cost of meals for this year with the number of meals from 22-23, we'd be looking at roughly $185,000. Okay. Sorry, he just did something and all my notes went.
That must mean that it's working.
Okay.
So much
I'll
for
do
that
my
today.
best just to talk through it.
Okay.
All right, and that is based on the Chartwell's numbers. So basically, instead of a meal costing $2.25 for breakfast, we would lose our reimbursement, but also the money coming in. So instead of getting a reimbursement of $2.25 and being able to provide, instead it would cost us $4.25 for each meal going out the door. So it's almost a double hit for us. And then if you could see my beautiful slides, you would see the increases. So the USDA suggests a yearly maximum increase of 10 cents. That is recommended, that is not mandatory. Okay? But we talked about, there is an option for a higher increase exists, but we advise to stay at the minimum threshold. I believe the minimum threshold aligns with our community needs, and even adhering to the minimum threshold, it still results in a slight increase for our families. So my recommendation would be a cautious approach, prioritizing accessible sustenance and community financial well-being. That's different.
Shh. Okay, there you
While we're hoping, may I add, Dr. Dietrich, to just remind our community to please, 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 please fill out your free and reduced lunch.
Oh, I will get there.
Whether you need to or not, it's good to
Yes.
fill it out and submit it. That helps.
Yes. Agreed. So if you could see, isn't that wonderful? So let me back up just a second. Oh, that's not me controlling it.
No.
Okay.
Where would you like it?
So slide number 3, please. Okay, so this basically is the $185,000. You can see it's based on the 22-23 quantity and 23-24 cost. The breakfast meal counts, how we come up with that $4.25, that is our food cost, our labor, and Chartwell's fee is 22 cents per meal. Go ahead and go to the next one. I think I covered everything on that. These are the notes that I just said. Again, it's a cautious approach. We've talked about just prioritizing, making sure kids have access to the food, but still thinking about our community's well-being financially. So here we are talking about the adult meals. So the USDA suggests a maximum increase of 25 cents for adult meals. The increase is a recommendation. Again, it's not obligatory. The option for a higher increase in adult meals does exist, but again, we recommend the minimum threshold, and the minimum threshold aligns with our community needs. I will also add that even adding a quarter to that, our numbers for staff usage of our cafeteria is already really low. So if one of our goals is to increase adult participation in our cafeteria, which it is, then, because you can see this right-hand column, that shows you each paid meal in that formula. That's what the district is benefiting, or profit. Okay, so if, it's still minimal. If we up 25 cents, we're making $1 on each adult meal. You can also see that the student price is there as well. Go ahead. So let me explain what this is. So basically what you are looking at is meals served per building. I was asked to make sure that we had an understanding of what our participation rate was for free, reduced, and full pay. So this is my attempt at that. So if we look at just the Early Childhood Center, So ECC is in yellow right here. Meals served, we serve 4,000 meals for breakfast, 9,766 for lunch, and then below is the average participation rate. So our average participation rate was 35.6% for breakfast and 86% for free lunch. Okay, so very high. I will say, so you can kind of follow those through. I will say there was an anomaly in the data. We ran the data 3 times, and I'm just going to be transparent about that. It does not make sense, and that is our middle school reduced lunch participation. We have 16 students eligible at the middle school for lunch, and we had 16.23 eating every day. That is, we went through it 3 times and ran the report 3 times. It is still telling us that. So I have asked Chartwells to dig in deeper to that. We may not have an answer to that, but I want to be transparent about the anomaly. Sometimes there are students who will eat 2 lunches, but I highly doubt we had 100% participation and there was 2 more kids eating lunch every day. So we will continue to go through that. I felt that it was really important that we were just looking at our marginalized students or disadvantaged students socioeconomically. So that was really where I was focusing, and what I've talked to Chartwells about is how do we make sure we're getting the message out to those families that are free. And that is, if you look at the number of denied claims for our meals this year, for our free and reduced lunch forms, our denial rate was 0, which means, at least that's what's showing in the computer, that we denied 0. So we really need to get it out there and get as many people possible to fill those out. At least that's what it's, you're shaking your head no, but that's what it's saying in the system. So, any questions?
So that means people that, everyone who applied for free lunch was approved for free lunch.
So the report that was handed to me said 0 denials, but he's shaking his head no. So for sure no. Okay. So that'll be but regardless, we know that there are families out there that are going to qualify, and we need to get that into their hands. So,
Dr. Dietrich, can you talk a little bit about the amount of unpaid balances we carry across the year, or an average of that?
Yes, that was actually my next talking point. So this year we had 43,000 and some change of unpaid meals, so whether they were reduced or free. So what that breaks down to is there was roughly $6,900 at the ECC, which comes out to 13.2 students a day. Okay, so if you take that number divided by the number of days, number of meals, you're looking at about 13.2 kids a day at the ECC did not pay. At the elementary school, you're looking at around 24 students a day. At the middle school, you're looking at 12.3 students a day. And at the high school, you're looking at 34 students a day. So we did try to break that number down by reduced, free, well, I guess it wouldn't be free, reduced and full pay. And there is not a report to run that down. That is going to take somebody going through person by person. I've solicited Chris for help on that. I've solicited Chartwells for that. And I've even tried getting that data to another person in the district that is excellent with Excel, and we're struggling to come up with that number.
We will be able to produce that sometime next week, and we can email that to you. I know that's an important number. Mike's correct. We've got a report for free and reduced lunch students, and we have a report for debt, but we don't have one that correlates the two, so we do have to do that correlation ourselves, which is a simple process if we have the time. Everyone's a little bit ramped up on bandwidth right now, so as soon as we get that report done, then it'll be something that we can repeat month after month, or quarter after quarter, and get to.
Well, and Chris, you and I have been around for the discussion about when the board decided that we weren't going to penalize children for unpaid meals, right, and made the commitment to make sure every kid eats, regardless of if they had money on their swipe card or in their account. I know at the time we discussed the possibility of sending delinquent payment to collection, and that we decided not to do that at the time, that we had some particularly connected staff members at the time who were just making some calls to say, hey, you're behind. Did you forget? Do you need to sign up for free and reduced price lunch because something changed at home? So I maybe I'm teeing you up for some additional information here.
And I can tell you that since parents have been getting into Power School as the start of the year and they're starting to load in money, they're seeing some of the debt that their children have accrued. And they're calling us going, oh my gosh, like, we're so sorry, why didn't someone contact us? So that is something that we need to do better out of my department, is making sure that we're communicating with families that, hey, this is your debt. And
And one practice that we did, that we are going to reintroduce this year, Mike and I have been talking about this as well, is the monthly balance letters, outstanding balance letters to families, making sure that at least we're communicating to them that they have an outstanding balance and that they need to pay it. But Katie, you're exactly right. MRH has never been, at least since I've been involved with the program, a district that's going to give kids a cheese sandwich or a sun butter sandwich or something like that. We're not going to do anything that's going to call that kid out, set them apart, shame them in any way. And we do need to make sure they have a full tummy when they go back to class after lunch. So the importance of the report that you requested is pretty great, because if we do identify free or reduced lunch students on there, we can forgive that debt. MRH will still take the hit, but we can forgive that debt, write it off our books, and we can also make sure that we've got that kid's family signed up for applying for the free or reduced lunch benefit. So there's two things that we can accomplish.
So what is the actual procedure during lunch? I mean, you go there, you grab your meal, and you just walk by and they say, oh, you have money, or you don't have money, or how does that work?
So they go through line, they get their food, they get there, and they actually have a punch key where they push in their number, and then it tells the person working if they have money in their account or they don't have money in their account.
What about like the difference between like just a bunch of junk food and like actually something that might be beneficial to them?
So if they're carrying a balance, they are not allowed to purchase a la carte.
Okay, perfect.
And the other piece is the meal pattern. There is a meal pattern requirement that the USDA requires us to use in order to receive reimbursement. So we have to make sure that every kid that comes to the line has the appropriate counts of dairy, fruit, grains, etc., proteins. And if they don't, we send it back to grab it. I don't want to eat an apple. You have to take an apple because that's part of the reimbursement.
So you take the apple, but it might not necessarily be eaten.
That's very true. Which does promote waste, which I don't like, but it is a requirement for the USDA for reimbursement.
In terms of overdue account balances, that is something that could be automated out of My School Bucks, for instance. Does the system notify families when they have a balance? Okay.
And it also provides a running total of the meals that the student is charged, the content of said meals. So, and another thing is we don't let students, did you say the thing where we don't let students charge a la carte if they
Correct.
hold?
We don't allow them to, at least in middle school, high school, we don't let them charge a la carte at all.
I think one of the questions, you said something that I wrote down, Dr. Dietrich, around the information being available in Power Schools. Do we know the percentage of families who have actually signed up for Power Schools?
I should take that back. That's through My School Bucks.
Okay.
Sorry, my apologies.
And we do encourage all families to sign up for the My School Bucks account. It is the most simple way to be communicated with what the balance is at any given moment, and also to load money onto the student's account.
It's also the same account that like expedition fees are paid, and I can't remember with elementary school if they use that for capstone was covered. But sometimes there's a spirit store in there. In the past, there was a lot of things that went through my school bucks.
I'd like to circle back to our eligibility for Provision 2. Is that assessed on an annual basis?
That's a great question. I know that, isn't it a 2-year?
It's a 4-year cycle.
4-year cycle.
And we are, last year was our review year, and we did not meet the threshold for free reduced lunch. Our free reduced lunch rate has dropped such that we no longer qualify for Provision 2.
So we were out of it for 4 years.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Is there a way to appeal if things change? Like if all of a sudden we get an influx of requests?
It's not a mid-year
So there's no, but I'm saying like no way to say like, hey guys,
It's
keep.
always a question that we can ask others.
No. And I can tell you that Chartwell's has been very much going to the state and saying, but look at the heat map around us. Specifically, we border right up against St. Louis City, and there's a pocket right there, and they're like, but what about these kids? And it's like, no, your entire district has to qualify. We can't just do it for this one small section.
It's also why we don't qualify for seamless summer, which provides space to our summer school students or community students for that matter. So a big piece of that, not to go too far into the weeds here, but it's critically important that all of our families, regardless of whether they think they do or do not qualify for benefits, apply for said benefits so that we can make sure that we're able to take advantage of all of those benefits ourselves, because all of our federal programs are based on that, not just lunch prices, but other programs, Title I, II, IV, E-rate, which provides our both connectivity from the outside world and interbuilding connectivity. So all of those things are dependent on those free and reduced lunch rates. And if over and above that, we need to make sure that we're able to provide to our families those benefits if they qualify.
And to add to that, every grant that we have written this summer around safety and security for the district says, are you 40% more? No. Are you rural? No. And that instantly hinders our ability to really be competitive in some of those grants.
And that free and reduced lunch form is on Power School, but if we want to fill it out in paper form, where would we get it?
Vince?
It's on the district website. You can download it as a PDF.
Accessible to
Yeah,
everyone.
it's right next to the My School apps, which is a little bit easier.
Vince, for the last couple of years, has been the free and reduced lunch champion for the district. And we're trying to transition him out of that as Mike and I are tag teaming some of the money aspects of food and service provision.
We had just to give some context on our free and reduced lunch number. So when our district enrollment was about 1,000 students, which was about 15 years ago or so, we had about 500 students qualify for free and reduced lunch, which is 50%. That's easy math, by the way, right? We're at 450. So that's not a significant difference in terms of the number of students who qualify for free and reduced lunch. Now our enrollment's up around 1,500 when you include preschool. So as a percentage, it's a significant difference. As a raw number of students that still need support, it's nearly the same. But the percentage dropped almost 20%. We're like in the low 30s. And I think that's where we're at. I mean, we may have missed a few. I think the vast majority of the folks that had qualified to get their applications in this year hit about a 70% rate of completion on the applications. And about 400 applications were denied. I know why. There's two reports, and the one you looked at is for students with applications. So we did a decent job scrambling to get those in late, which we always do, like we did earlier this year. That just gives you some context on some numbers.
Thank you, that's helpful. Am I correct in assuming that the participation rate for free breakfast in the ECC in the elementary school is higher because that's an in-classroom meal versus something that they need to move throughout the building to pursue?
So I thought that when I asked the ECC that this year, they said they did not provide the breakfast inside the classrooms.
Okay.
So I think that's more, it's a lot easier to guide the younger ones and hey, make sure you get your breakfast, let's go, and they push them through. Where middle school and high school, I mean, we're setting up, the tables in the hallways, and really just pushing the kids to do that, and they choose to either eat at home, they choose to not get it, or unfortunately, a lot of them are in QT for breakfast.
Breakfast.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm still really struggling with letting go of the free breakfast, even with seeing these participation rates, because I think it's an important measure of equity to make sure that every student is showing up in the classroom every day, ready to learn with the same resources. I appreciate you providing the cost of that, and I just wonder what options we have in this case.
Yeah, I mean, I think along the lines of, no kid is turned away from the lunch line, even if there's no money, on their card. I would I would like to see us adopt a similar approach to breakfast. And I don't know if we can sort of bifurcate those as well, you know, as far as the following up with families around like pay your lunch debt, you know, versus like, I'd be willing to kind of write off some breakfast this year, you know, as we make this transition to say, yeah, how many kids are, you know, taking advantage of this across the district. We may also want to think about it. I think the idea of universal free lunch did make it a little further in Jeff City than most folks thought it would. It didn't make it all the way, obviously, but perhaps including that explicitly as a request that MSBA take that up again, and perhaps as part of our advocacy platform as well. The state obviously made some really upsetting decisions for just summer SNAP reimbursement as well this summer, but hopefully they're going to get those computer systems up to date so that folks have access next year. But yeah.
Oh, but if kids did want to pay for breakfast, they would still be able to do that, right?
Oh, absolutely.
It's a tough one for me because $185,000, that's a lot of money.
Yeah,
I mean, I
we
think I'd like
don't
to
have that.
see what it's like if those kids that qualify for free breakfast are still allowed to get free breakfast, and those other children, if they want breakfast, they're allowed to buy breakfast. I'm just curious to see what's going to happen as far as the numbers next year.
That is a good point. The free and reduced lunch benefit remains, I say lunch, free and reduced meal benefit remains in place even for breakfast. So not that all of the students that qualify for that program will take advantage of breakfast, but it is there and available to them if they need it, or 30 cents.
And that's also depending on how you want. I could bring some data back after the first 2-3 months of school or whatever you know, if you see something different, let me know. I can bring that back and let you know kind of what our participation rates changed based on losing provision too.
I think regardless, we probably do need to, you know, I think there's probably also the case where some families may not realize that their kid, you know, is going to be taking advantage of this, right? And do you end up with, you know, an unexpected, you know, $30 bill at the end of the month for a kid who got breakfast, and it was like, oh, we weren't planning for that. I certainly think we need to explicitly draw attention to it in communications from the school, but yeah, it's the explanation that the community doesn't have as much universal need is a hard one to hear right now, I think, so.
I agree, and I'd like for us to be able to assess this before this time next year. If we can look at data around participation with paid lunch sometime in the next few months, once we get going, to see what the impact is on our students. I would like for us to be doing more to promote the free and reduced lunch form. I know we've all seen it in at least one email from our building leaders. I know this happens every year. We beg and we plead and we yell, but the more we can do in that regard, I think will benefit us.
Because we have a 4-year benchmark, not 3,
Yeah.
that we need to make sure it's accurate.
Thank
Other
you.
questions, comments? Thank you, Dr. Dietrich, appreciate it. Item 3.05, board policies, GCBDA, professional support and support staff leaves.
Okay, so last year, our Compensation and Benefits Task Force, or CBTF, one of the topics that came to that group was the idea of paid time off in place of sick leave and personal leave. question and potentially pose a solution to it, or a pathway to it. So I think that we've done that. Policy GCEDA applies to professional staff, so that would be any certificated staff. And then GDEDA is the support staff or non-certified employee portion. And that's what the distinction is. So some of the key items here. First and foremost, sick and personal leave go away. Those are no longer a thing. You call it paid time off or PTO. And a staff member is able to use that time as paid time off, regardless of whether they're sick or have a personal need. And I'm going to start with the opening. I'll read the opening paragraph because I think that does a good job of framing the spirit of this policy. Consistent contact with students and staff is important to the learning environment and district operation, and therefore is an essential duty of a professional staff member's position. However, the board recognizes that there are circumstances that require an employee to miss work, and the purpose of this policy is to identify situations where paid and unpaid leave from work are appropriate. So what this does is it allows an employee the freedom to use that time as they see fit, but also understanding that they have a responsibility to students in their classrooms or the district as a whole, depending on the position. So we do have a couple of guardrails that are in place that are very similar to what we had in the previous version of this policy. So one of which is no more than 3 consecutive days for any reason. If you do need those 3 consecutive days off using your paid time off, it is a request from your immediate supervisor, and the district still retains the ability to request a doctor's authorization or a doctor's note, if you will, if the district feels that those leaves are being used in a way we did not intend. So that remains in place. Other than that, the professional piece of this, professional distinction on this is our non-teachers. So all of those of us that are 12-month employees would still receive the 20 days of vacation time as they typically would. One thing though is the personal leave allocated does go away. So it's a bit of a trade-off. In the previous policy, teachers received 10 sick days accrued up front and also 2 personal days for a total of 12 days. In this scenario, the 2 go away, the 10 stay as paid time off, also accrued at the beginning of the year, but they can be used for anything instead of just sick, those 10 being used for sick. So it's 10 that can be used for anything as opposed to 10 only for sick and 2 for personal. So that is a bit of a trade-off there. And on personal leave for the 12-month employees, that 5 days also goes away. It'll be 12 days of PTO accrued at the beginning of the year, along with the 20 days of vacation days, 20 vacation days that were previously allocated.
For 12-month.
For 12-month employees, yeah.
Right.
Essentially what it is 1 day of paid time off per month that you're employed.
And this will be clearly delineated in some
We're
sort
gonna
of
have-
form
we're gonna
or
have to put
picture
together
that'll
a
make
whole
it easy
lot.
for people to understand.
If they had to take FMLA, does the school require that they exhaust their PTO time prior to, or is it? I mean, there's a couple of different ways to do it. You can either do it concurrently, or you can do it separately. Does
that piece still remains in place, yes.
okay? And also too, just an FYI, you realize, or maybe y'all don't realize, but if an employee is missing 3 days for a qualified medical reason and they've been here over a year, then FMLA paperwork has to be required. Has to be offered. So that's something that really definitely needs to be educated into them, just because, yeah, that's going to be a problem.
Sure.
So this request is coming from CBTF, which is made up of teachers and building level administrators. I mean, I think it is a change that hopefully is in line with expressing our our trust of the employees to manage their time as appropriate. And yeah, I mean, I think beyond the need for clarity of a rollout around this and, you know, reminders about the process, I mean, I'm in favor of it. I would love to see an actual markup. I know we have the Word document, but to see, you know, the strike throughs of the existing policy, you know, with the existing. I don't know if we have this data, Dr. Ambers Phillips, but do we have a sense of how many sick days may have gone unused historically across the district? I mean,
Do not have that
okay,
data.
yeah,
That's
and I don't know
definitely
if we
something
have
can
been
bring
keeping that in a way that is easily reviewable for this, but
So
it's
one
a
of
curiosity.
One of the problems that is identified by the teachers is those personal days are essentially a use it or lose it proposition.
Yep.
We allowed, the previous policy allowed them to carry one of those days for a maximum of 3 personal
Yep.
days. So
Yep.
that at the end of the year, it puts teachers in an awkward position. They don't want to lose those days
Mhm.
or those hours, whichever applies. So we end up taking leave when they don't really want to, and we really don't want them to either.
Yeah.
So it puts everybody in a bit of an awkward position.
Mhm.
So this hopefully will allow our professionals to use that time at more appropriate times of the year when everything's not trying to
Yeah.
come to a head at the end. But I would say that we do trust our teachers, and that's the only reason we do this. I will say that MSBA does a good job of being our watchdog when it comes to policy and procedure life. These are not the types of policies that are typically endorsed because
Yeah.
school districts have done this and it's not ended very well for them. I think that the culture is such here at MRH is one of professionalism and students first, so I don't feel like we need to be concerned. However, having said that, after conversation with our district council, we are aware that we may need to make some adjustments to this, either as we go through the year or at the end of the year, as we live with it for a little while.
What
In
about,
this case, what would be the penalty if you went over those days of PTO? Like, let's say you got sick and it was a legitimate illness, but not enough for FMLA, but you've gone over your PTO hours. Is there like a specific penalty that's in place?
If it's a qualified absence, the only penalty is leave without pay.
Okay.
Is essentially a dock.
Gotcha.
And that brings up, oh, this is very complicated, so I'm sorry, I'm trying to keep it as high level as I can. So if a certificated employee that's paying into the PSRS retirement system misses time, it's docked, that goes against their year of service credit with the system. They have an option to buy that back with the district match, it's 14.5% on both sides. They do have the option to buy that back, but at the end of the year, if they miss, say, 5 days that were not paid, they are 5 days short for a full year of service credit. So when we see that happen, and it's often with FMLA, usually mothers taking the time off for the child, the fathers in kind, we advise them both from HR side and the business office side about the process through which they can reclaim that lost time. So we'll do a payroll deduction for them in the coming year and pay that to the system at the end of the year on their behalf. We don't want to get into a situation because of a qualified illness or an absence where teachers would be losing service credit and come up to retirement and the system says, nope, sorry, you're half a year short, you can't retire.
Yeah.
So that would be crushing.
so how are the building administrators going to decide like who gets priority for leave? Is there a seniority system or is it just first come, first
It's not a
served?
priority, it's based on building. So it's based on the operation of your building. The principal is the best judge of what's required in your building at any given moment in time. So if there is something coming up, they are within their right to deny that day.
Is that codified anywhere at the building level?
In this policy.
Okay. And just to be clear, this is something that the teachers are in favor of. This is what they want.
Yes.
It came from CBTF, and it was actually brought my first year during CBTF, and I wanted to seek to understand, and I think a clear example, one of our staff members had a daughter who was performing in New York at a play, but they didn't have any personal time. They had sick time, and I said, oh boy, I'd be sick. You know, so we started having conversation, just being honest, you know, when you're not able to support your kids. For me, when we talk about a form of self-care, me being able to be there for my children is self-care for me. And so that's how the conversation came up, and that information continued to carry into this past school year as a means to, as Chris so eloquently said, our staff are professionals. We don't have staff taking advantage and taking multiple days off. They do show up and they are committed. So when we started having the conversation, I did not have any concern with us bringing this forward to the board.
And we're supposed to be voting on this tonight. I know our practice is typically to review and to wait to approve a following meeting. I recognize that it would be potentially even more of a paperwork challenge if we start the year under one leave system and then switch it mid stream here. So I think with the caveat that there may need to be some tweaks to it.
Could we agree to bring it back maybe in like the middle of the semester, right before?
Maybe we bring it back if it needs to be brought back.
Well, how would we know if it needs to be brought back?
So we monitor.
The building leaders will let us know if there's a problem.
We monitor, and the HR department has made some adjustments because one of the things that we do look at is absenteeism rate by building.
Yeah.
And some of it is challenging to do because you have individuals who are out for professional development. You also have individuals out for sick days. And so being able to monitor that, so we do look at that data as well. And so it would be obvious, for example, individuals who do take advantage of pattern days off, we know who those individuals are, and it's far and few. And so, you know, believing that we don't put consequences on the whole based on a few. And I do think that this will be value add for our community as we talk about retention strategies. It's not just about pay, it's also about leave time and also tuition reimbursement and those things. So I think our committee has been very thoughtful. They have been very collaborative as we work towards bringing something to them that we could actually bring to the board.
And just remember that we don't want to encourage people to be sick, to be able to do what they need to do for self-care. And quite honestly, people will plan. People are really, you give them the opportunity, they're like, okay, I will give my notice, I will plan out what I want to do.
We know that blue flu is a thing, and we would like to reduce that and give folks the opportunity to be upfront and transparent about the reasons why they're taking off, rather than feeling like they need to hide in a corner and take a sick day when they perhaps aren't sick. This is to allow them that freedom to make those choices on their own as professionals.
To Josh's point, perhaps we can keep this as an agenda item for CBTF for them to revisit and to monitor and have our CBTF committee rep from the board, when that gets identified at our work session, bring that back to us in their report.
Do you feel like you would like a report, a status report on this, and maybe we were talking about food service perhaps in the first quarter? Is that something that you have interest in, or do we just?
I would like to see it when everything actually gets finalized, and so we can see the actual document or the draft of the document, like right before it is finalized, in case.
Well, what is presented here, it's not written in our like typical policy, but this is what says draft is what we would be approving tonight.
And then we send it.
No, what I'm saying is that he's going, my understanding is that there are still some provisions that are going to be added, and right before that final.
Oh, like a rollout plan. But that
Yes.
would be part of the policy.
Yeah.
That'd be more on the procedural side.
Right, yeah.
And I can work on that and run that to you so we can put something together.
We can put it in a board note.
Yeah, I can't promise by this Thursday,
Oh.
this coming Thursday, but we will get it to you before the next board meeting.
That's fine. And I guess the other thing too is I am a little bit concerned about the policy for notifying like when you're going to be off. Like if typically, like I said, like where we're always saying is that everybody's going to plan ahead, but you know, I just want to know if there is going to be something in there like, hey, if you plan on taking an extended vacation, you know, let us know however many weeks in advance or whatever, because that would be important for the building to be able to plan around. So I don't know if there's a mechanism for that, because I feel like if everybody can just sort of do things last minute, not that they would have used it, but I feel like there's a potential for some sort of chaos.
Right, and the provision written in the policy is to the extent possible, or if possible. And that allows for those last minute things to occur. So the trick with writing a policy is, I've just done a couple of them now, but the tricky part of them is to write them general and broad enough to cover enough so that there is room for interpretation by, that we can write in a procedure, but then specific enough to create an appropriate box around the policy and the things that it's protecting.
And I think we do currently have blackout days for holidays,
Blackout
correct?
dates are written
Yes.
here as well. Those remain.
Yes.
And we have historical attendance data as well. I mean, I think 2 years ago when we decided to close for the entire week of Thanksgiving, there was some, you know, reflection on historical data around how many people typically, you know, called off sick that week, how many kids call off sick that week, you know, that sort of thing too. So this may you know, mess with the data a little bit in the short term, but I think we do have some you know, historical data to review as well.
Cool.
So what I'm hearing, just so that I'm clear on the next steps, is we want a comparison, we want the marked up version.
Well, I think that we are in agreement to vote on this
Yeah, if we're gonna
tonight,
Sure.
but eventually a marked up version just to look at.
And we will get the MSBA version of this that will have the statute references and the cross references to the other policies.
That may be also just a helpful tool for current staff as well, you know, who are used to the previous system to be able to see, you know, that we did.
And as we go through, we've done this in the past when we've made modifications to this particular policy, we find other policies that are connected to this one that we might need to modify as well. So as we encounter those, we'll bring those with those modifications.
And there is a logical time to be notifying staff as they're coming into the new school year that this change has been made.
Yes, and that's what I was chuckling when Katie started saying that, because we did have conversation in regards to the policy coming first for study and then bringing it back for action, but with staff coming in and wanting them to have that information prior to the onset of the school year was the rationale for actually asking for action, so that we can have an opportunity to communicate the information out.
No additional questions? Thank you, Chris. We'll move on to item 4.01, our MSIP 6 update, climate and culture survey with Vince Estrada.
I'm just staying hooked on, because I'm scared to.
I think that's the right move. Good evening, everybody. I just wanted to give you a brief update on the climate and culture survey work that we're doing in the district. As you recall, we did the climate and culture survey last year. We used the DESI survey. It gave us some data. It gave us some things to work on, and it did help inform the plan to some degree. But we thought that we might want to go explore a different tool that was both more user-friendly and was more nimble in terms of creating data reports that would help inform our practice. So we're looking at, we're looking at 3 options. One is to the University of Missouri, their MTS has PBIS. We're a member of that cohort. We meet with them once a month already, so we have a strong partnership with this group. Dr. Lisa Powers heads them up, and they created a survey out of the national PBIS survey that they've modified to include the Missouri MSIP 6 requirements. So it does meet the requirements for MSIP 6. We check the box. The cost would be none for us because we're members of that cohort. It is kind of grounded in good, solid climate and culture survey work, interviewing all the stakeholders. It has strong validity and high reliability because it is based on the national survey they've been using for many years. And it's, in terms of its usability, it uses kind of a Google survey format and a kind of Excel queries, so it does have some nimbleness about it. I looked at a training video on it today, and it does allow you to kind of do some subgroups and subscales that really allow you to kind of drill down, looking for opportunities for growth. So we'll be examining that. And there's links there you can look at some sample surveys, and you can also review that 18-minute video on how that's laid out. So that's option one we're going to consider. Option two is Character Plus. We're also a member of the Character Plus cohort. They're local, good partners, very kind of St. Louis, regional, Missouri-based. They created a survey that also meets M66 requirements, different cost structure. One school would be for free, $750 for each additional school. It's kind of built on sort of a self-determination kind of frame of thought around belonging, autonomy, competence, and safety. It is used by about a half a dozen districts in the region. It's a survey that's been widely used for 25 plus years, and they sent us a sample report and kind of customize that to meet our needs too. So we're going to consider that as an option. And then option three is an old friend, Panorama, which was, I have to say, it does meet M66 requirements. What was interesting about Panorama, and I'm always happy to learn new things and have my hypotheses proven wrong sometimes. A lot of districts still use Panorama. I was surprised when I sent out an email to my student service colleagues that the vast majority of them are using this. It is a national program. There's more considerable costs, but we haven't gotten a price point from them. But it does kind of check all the boxes in terms of climate and culture survey work around validity and reliability. I think it's probably a good fit for larger districts, but it is. We'll revisit it. I think when we did it the last time, we had a partnership with Opportunity Trust that covered some of the costs, but that ended, so we went in a different direction. So we'll also revisit that to see if it's a good fit for us. So what are next steps? So we're going to present these three options to the MTSS district leadership team to kind of wrestle with it, gather more data. We're going to use this hexagon tool to assess the three options. The hexagon tool was shared with us by Dr. Powers and a group at Missouri. It gives you sort of an objective way to kind of assess tools versus kind of going with preferences. I know this person, I had a friend that used it. It takes into account cost, efficiency, effectiveness, kind of user-friendliness, all those things. So you kind of look at it somewhat objectively and make a good decision. We'll make that recommendation to COA and then kind of present that recommendation to the board sometime this fall. So that's kind of, I just wanted to give you an update about where we're at. We're down to three. We'll do sort of objective, kind of deep dive, and talk with our district leaders and you guys about where we want to go.
Vince, can you share who participates on the MTSS district leadership team and how that parallels to the SEL team, just so that individuals know who?
Great question. So our district MTSS team, leadership team, which met once a month last year with great attendance, it does include a lot of members of our SEL team. So I'm on there, Dr. McGee comes, Lauren Weissler comes, Rachel Ward, so we have a data assessment. We have representation from every building. Is there an AP from every building? We have district social worker, counselors that participate. So we have a cross-section of teachers, counselors, social workers, assistant principals, data and assessment, curriculum instruction, MTSS, and I pop in and do my very best to help facilitate as well. So it's actually when we created the team, I thought, man, this is a tough lift. 10 a.m. once a month, it's a tough time to meet. But the participation level was about 80%. And we would have a good agenda. We'd keep it to an hour, and we got some work done. So it's a good working group. We established some norms, and I think we'll be able to do this work pretty easily because we established some kind of working norms last year. We did kind of a pre and post assessment of where we were at in terms of MTSS, and so there's a good working momentum with that group, and I think we'll be able to kind of use that tool and come up with a good recommendation for the district.
Well, I have a question. So when you do meet with the representatives from the building, are they indicating that the various surveys are reflective of their concerns in the buildings, or is it just, I mean, if it's just M6, it might not necessarily be the things that the teachers are most concerned about. And so we're both concerned about both, really. We're concerned about the requirements, but we're also concerned about what really is important to the teachers. So is there a mechanism to make sure that the things that are important to them are also included in these surveys? Yeah,
so using that tool, I think it'll really lean into that particular component. Is it meaningful? Does it give voice to the people you're surveying, or are you just trying to check a box? And that'll be an important consideration when we choose the next tool. We knew that the DESE survey would allow us to at least get some data and meet some compliance, but we didn't feel like it was really gave our constituents, both students and our faculty members and our community members, the voice that we needed. So that's why we want to kind of explore that. And that will be one of the components when we start doing assessment. That's going to be one of the things we want to really kind of hinge our decision on. And we'll try to get feedback from those folks about that. So
thank you.
Thank you.
Along those lines, Vince, I am appropriate district team to be making recommendation. However, since it is also administered to students and to families, I would ask if you don't already have a plan that there is some mechanism to get some input from,
Sure.
students as well as, not obviously every family, but, some representative.
That's a good idea. We can definitely do that, for sure.
Great.
I think that would also be helpful in terms of ensuring participation. I do think sometimes families feel over-surveyed and are not quite sure
Yeah.
about the objectives of what we're giving them, and I would assume that's the same is true for staff,
Yeah.
that we're very intentional in our communication about why this is valuable, how this gives voice that then gets shared with the board so that we can make decisions based on their
Those are
feedback.
great suggestions, and we can absolutely do
And
that.
also, I would probably want a specific emphasis on families that seem underrepresented in the district, because I feel like that is, we're not getting the answers that we need about what's going on. Like, how can we improve their experience
Yeah.
with the district?
Yeah, I would concur. Okay. Great. Thank you. Those are good suggestions. Anything else? All right, thank you all.
Great, thank you. Appreciate this work. All right, now 4.02, construction update. Chris, you can answer all my questions about timeline.
Yes. So, if you've been watching what's going on outside, you may have noticed over the past 3 weeks, significant progress has been made on Building A, which is this big brick building out here. There's a couple of things that we have really been pushing to get complete. Number one was getting a lid on the building, which is a roof. You gotta have a roof. You can't do anything inside until you have that roof. Then also sealing the building off from the elements. So that's windows, doors, storefront. Once those things happen, once the building envelope is complete, then on the inside, we can start to fly. In advance of that, well, here's where we are. We have a roof, doors, windows and storefront come next week, and we'll start installing. In advance of that, we requested that we start one-sided drywall on all framed surfaces over here. So you have to have an inspection before you fully drywall a wall. You have to have the electric and the plumbing all running through it, but there's nothing that says you can't have one side covered. So we've got the subcontractors hanging drywall, they're flying. We had a huge drywall delivery Monday of this week and a little bit on Tuesday. So they're loading that into each of the floors, and anywhere that's not by a window, they're hanging drywall. We've got everything almost completely framed. It looks very different this week than it did even from last. The gym lobby's coming along nicely. The fireproofing is done. We're starting to frame in there next week. So then comes the question, when will we be done? So we did lose time. There were, in the memos I had been mentioning that there was an issue with bar joists, which is we'll just call them the roof trusses for the gym lobby. They ended up being too short. There was a wall that was thought to be a bearing wall. It was not a bearing wall. So when there was a bearing wall behind it, though, we were about that short, 18 inches or so short. So there was a fix, but it did take about almost 5 weeks for all of that to get set to move forward. We were moving forward on other areas of the building, but we did lose quite a bit of time as a result of that. And that's important, that particular area, because the strategy is to work in the lobby and the courtyard simultaneously and work to the street. We have to do that because there's still a 12-foot hole that has to get dug at the front of that building for foundations and stairs and a number of other things, retaining walls that have to go in there. So all that said and done, the October 18th deadline seems to be unattainable at this point. I will say that another activity that we, the owner, MRH, has undergone is to identify additional subcontractors, and we're working with our general contractor to make sure that this job is staffed appropriately to get it done as quickly as we possibly can. So we've been successful in that. There's another masonry company that's partnered with our subcontractor. We've not needed them yet because they've staffed up the masons. We have additional carpenters that we can add if we need to. There is critical mass as to how many people you can put in one place at one time and how many trades. You can't have trades working over top of each other. It's unsafe and also inefficient. But I will say, and I hope Mike has observed the same, that I feel like we have the pedal on the floor now, and we're starting to pick up pace. So as we get into the next week, when the building is sealed up, I think we're going to start seeing things move a lot faster than what the software is telling us it's going to. So as those memos come to you, I will have updates on where we're at on that schedule and what that's going to look like.
So I know that we had hope that the courtyard would be ready by Monday. So this is the official, we're so sorry, the courtyard will not be ready on Monday. 5 weeks is a lot to lose. So that's a big, that happens in construction. Sometimes the measurements are off and you can't move forward. So 5 weeks would have gotten us a lot of work done, but 5 weeks in the scheme of a life of a district is just 5 weeks.
It is, and it's difficult when you're a student or a teacher or some other employee here, because we've been living with this construction for over 2 years now. And everyone's growing weary. I will tell you that everybody involved in this project is growing weary. Subcontractors, the general contractors, the third-party inspectors, everybody wants to be done. So there is nobody involved in this process that is trying to make it go slower. We are all looking for ways, and I'm on the phone with the general contractor every single day, actually multiple times a day. I'm on site multiple times a day. Mike's keeping track of things on his end as well to make sure that the intersection of construction and our day-to-day operations are maintained, that separation is maintained so that we can still learn and work in this building. The Commons is going to be amazing. The courtyard is going to be, it's going to be awesome. If you look out there now, there's a U-shaped concrete bench. We had a concrete artisan out there doing the finishing on that the other day, and I was awed at the skill required to do even just the topping, the hand-rubbed finish that we had to put on that. It's going to be really amazing. It's going to be well lit. Stairs there's adequate ADA access, plenty of places for the kids to sit and work, congregate, meet. Under the overhang still is, it's filled with materials right now. That is still going to be a viable space for the tables and chairs. We'll go back there so the students and teachers can go have class out there. It's going to be a pretty cool space. So I was also hopeful that we could have it for the start of school, but when it is delivered to us, it's going to be worth it. And I'll say the same for the building, because it's going to do, what it's going to do for this school, it adds gym that we need, obviously, due to our enrollments. But I think one of the more exciting pieces is it gives our alternative program a place in the building. That was a huge goal of the district, the long-range facilities task force, is to get them out of the house, get them here with the rest of everybody else, and include them. This makes the transitions between that program and the general program a lot more smooth. And it's an important piece that's been missing for some time. We finally have the opportunity to do it.
Again, we've never done a project on the scale of this before. So yes, to do a 8 million plus, right? Yeah. I'm thinking back to the previous project, right?
Yeah, we're at 20 million, 360,000.
The 20 million, I think, again, the fact that it's had to happen while also, running school years in the midst of it, it hasn't been, I'm sure it's been very challenging for those folks using this building. It hasn't been 2 solid years of construction. We have had to pause for, activities and class and things like that too, so, yeah. But yes, it is. This is tracking with the way many projects have done their final sprint. So,
I drove
yeah.
by another school district on my way home from here yesterday evening that's in a similar position, school starting. I drove out and their building looks exactly like our building. It's got some brick, some not trying to start at the start of school too. This is just one little commercial for the trades. Depending on the union, we are losing 5 tradespeople and picking up 1 or 2, depending on which union you talk to. That means that we're under a critical shortage for tradespeople in every single trade. And we're experiencing those shortages, which is why we're having to combine masons crews. People are bringing in folks from out of town to work, so we need tradespeople. And the more we can get and the quicker we can get them, the more projects like this can be completed closer to being on schedule.
Thank you, Chris. 4.03, our progress video on construction.
I hope there's audio. So it's becoming a lot easier to envision what the courtyard is going to look like. So there's the walkway that's been poured. And you can see that's the, these are steps that will descend right there. Down there. And that's the bench area that you were talking about, right? And those are the steps right out in front of the middle school office that will descend into the courtyard. So there's the brick veneer that is essentially finished on the east-facing side. Those are the Lego blocks for the section of the building that is still not complete. It is hopping inside. I grabbed my hard hat, and they still look at me kind of sideways when I go in, but especially that guy. He didn't like me being so close to his cinder block saw. And that is the west side. And I guess this would be your first virtual hard hat tour of the inside. You can see all the framing for the walls and doors. It's tight, it's noisy, but the progress is, you know, the vibe is palpable. When you talked about the pedal being to the floor, you can see it every time you go over there. It's just behind. There's a remnant from the olden days. This is standing inside the gym lobby, looking back out into the commons now.
That's the fireproofing itself.
Right. And then when that plywood comes down, that'll be the entryway into the second floor high school hallway. So there you go. Thank you.
Thank you, Ed. Item 4.04, our athletics request proposal by Mr. Davenport.
I do want to acknowledge also that Ms. Noby is also present, and she's one of the coaches for the girls soccer team.
Good evening. Today we're going to talk about MRH athletics and staffing proposal. So as we know, coaches play an integral part in the development of our young people. The late great John Wooden said, a good coach can change a game, a great coach can change a life. So our purpose is to address inequities in the coaching staff and to increase access to competitions for JV girls soccer players. Coaching student athlete ratio, as you look at our female sports, basketball, we have 21 participants this past year, the 2022-23 school year. We had 21 athletes and 2 coaches. Softball had 18 softball players and 2 coaches. Volleyball had 40 student athletes and 3 coaches. And our girls soccer team had 35 players and 2 coaches. So when you break down our numbers for our female sports, as you can see, our soccer team, they're about 17 and a half players per coach, and that's the highest ratio for our female sports. As you look at our male sports, boys basketball had 28 athletes with 3 coaches. Our boys soccer had 40 student athletes with 2 coaches. Wrestling had 7 student athletes with 2 coaches, and our baseball team had 13 players and 3 coaches. The next slide we're going to show is our co-ed sports. Looking at cross country, we had 19 male athletes and 7 female athletes and 2 coaches. So that's about 12 and a half. Our track team is by far our largest program. We're looking at about 88 participants. Within those 88 students, we have 4 coaches. Our tennis team last year which was a co-ed team. It was a mix. We had boys and girls because it was our first year of having boys tennis. We had 10 student athletes altogether. We had four female and 10 male players. Esports has about 60 student athletes. Esports has a combination of middle and high. They had 3 coaches. And then our speech and debate team had about 40 participants, and they had 2 coaches. So our proposal is to add another soccer coach for this upcoming spring season. It will cost us $3,173. Some of the things that we have to look at, Misha, there are some rules with Misha. It doesn't necessarily state that you have to have 2 coaches, but in the event if something happens to the coach, whether they get a red card, they get put out, they get sick, then we would have to forfeit the game. So we want to make sure that we don't forfeit any games, but we also want to make sure that we're growing our program as well. So being able to offer a full JV schedule for our young people is going to help us enhance our soccer program in that manner. Last year, we had some issues as far as scheduling because of the lack of coaches. We could only offer a small amount of games, and in some instances, we had to do half games. So meaning varsity would play a full game, and then afterwards, our JV girls soccer players would only be eligible to play for 40 minutes or so. Any questions? Yes.
How did we get here? I realize that wasn't very eloquent. Can you explain to me, how did we get 4 coaches for 3 coaches for 13 baseball players? How did we end up in a place where, how do we decide as a district how many coaches a sport gets?
Well, I think there have been some fluctuation within participation. So that's certainly one of the things that we're looking at. There was also, when certain sports have always had 3 coaches, I think sometimes the fact that they just kept them, and then sometimes numbers also decrease. So just say, for instance, in the spring, when we started off with boys baseball, January, February, when they started to actually get the contact days in, we had 20 athletes. We had 20 student athletes. From January until March, our first game, that number dwindled down to 13.
I think to answer the larger question, Ms. Noby submitted a proposal. That proposal, I'm not sure where it landed. She submitted the proposal again to Ms. Huffman, and during my collaboration with Ms. Huffman, she said, "Did you see this proposal?" I said, "I did not." And so we reviewed it together, and I pointed out that there were inequities, very clear inequities amongst male and female sports, but even looking at the soccer team. And so I told her that I would discuss it with Brandy and Amber and see if we can bring it forward to the board. I think the biggest piece that was glaring in the proposal was the inability of the JV players to actually have games outside of the conference. And so if we're talking about scaling and growing players, the only way you get better is if you play. And we can't do that if the coaches are designated to the varsity sports. So if they wanted to go outside of the regular schedule, that's the only way they can do it.
And to piggyback off of that, even within our own conference, not every program has a JV program. So there are some conferences and some schools that are smaller than us that are they're barely able to field a varsity team. And so this kind of came about when we looked at our schedule, and we had a game scheduled where varsity and JV played at the same time, but they were in 2 different locations.
So our coaches, are they also like staff or they teach classes as well, or are they just designated coaches?
It depends on the program. Like this past year, our baseball coaches, they were all non-MRH employees. But if you look at most of our other coaching opportunities, they're mainly someone from the district, whether it's the ECC, the elementary, or even here at the high school.
Well, is it possible to pull from the staff? Like, I mean, is it cheaper to have a teacher/coach or to have just a coach?
Well, the price is the same amount of price, so we have an extra duty. We have an extra duty sheet that we look off of, and so it doesn't matter if the coach is in-house or if the coach is from MRH. What we want to do is provide high-quality coaching for all of our athletics and activities so our students can grow.
And And is the reason that the wrestling team with 7 people has 2 coaches because you need a minimum of 2?
Well, part of the wrestling is we were looking to add girls wrestling last year, and I think that could have been part of it. As you know, this year we will be adding, so I would assume that those numbers will grow as well.
I would also add that I have found that being able to hire internal staff, meaning teachers, because of the relationships with kids. And so when you think about, I use Joe Saucelle, for example, with basketball and the relationships that he has with kids, the community service that he allows them to participate in. So there is a benefit of actually having our internal staff to be coaches. And the stipends, as Mr. Davenport shared, really are consistent across because we do actually have a guide of how
Well,
people are
maybe
paid.
I wasn't clear. I'm concerned. What my question was is if you have just a outside coach, is that the same price as it would be to have a teacher and okay?
Yes. Like currently right now, our volleyball coaches, they're all outside coaches, but they're paid on the same scale as if they were MRH employees.
And they're MRH employees that could fill those positions.
It depends on the sport. It depends on the sport and expertise of our staff. As you know,
They're
staff.
competitively posted positions, right? So
Yes.
anyone can apply.
Anyone can apply. Yeah.
So this is a no-brainer, so hold on. Chris, do we have the money? And how can we get the money, because this is a need?
So we can allocate the budget for this. I've said this a whole lot, and I'll say it again. We can afford almost anything, we just can't afford everything.
Correct.
So this is one of those places where the cost is really not that great, all things considered.
Yeah.
So it's such a small percentage. That's not to say it's not important, because every dollar is. But yes, we can absorb this, and it's for the right reasons. The only difference, just one little point of clarification, one difference on the cost between a staff person, a certificated staff person, and an outside person is the cost that we would pay in the retirement system. So an additional 14.5%. So again, it's not that much money, considering the benefit that it provides for our student body.
I just would like to just remind all of us who had kids who've grown up through this, we are aware of this and have been aware of this. And so it's about darn time.
Yes, and for those of us who don't yet have kids in I am sorry that Ms. Noby had to bring this forward herself. I am curious if there is some plan for auditing this going forward. I'm also unclear if we've reached equity through this because, which of these sports have JV squads, which of these sports don't? 40 boys playing soccer with 2 coaches, do we have the same issue that we have with girls? I feel like I don't have everything that I need here for this. I'm totally on board with this particular proposal, but especially if we're talking about coaches who may not be internal candidates, how do those folks advocate for increases? So again, I don't need an answer right now, but I do think that looking at this more strategically going forward is a growth opportunity for all of us.
Yes, I totally agree. This is something I definitely will look into, and to make sure that all of our sports are adequately. So
The other thing is we considered reducing the number of coaches, let's say baseball, for example, where they're 13. I understand what you said, it started off with more players and then it kind of dropped off. But if we see that consistently, is there a way to reduce the number of coaches in that particular sport, and then it kind of makes up the difference for putting a coach in a higher playing area,
So let me see if I can understand this right. And so when we see if we can reallocate the funds from one sport to another, that would be a Chris.
What about
question.
with the youth sports? There's a pretty heavy volunteer element with the parents. Is there an opportunity for parents to help with the high school or the middle school, high school sports to sort of alleviate some of that pressure?
There are some opportunities, but we also want to make sure that we stay clear of nepotism and make sure that we're giving everybody an equal chance.
I would probably add to that. So I've been to the MRH, some of our kiddos' games, and anybody who knows me knows I'm rather competitive, and I'm like, you throw the ball in the first place. And so it is about teamwork. And so one of the things that I have heard from coaches is about developing the pipeline for students as they go into high school sports. So I think about our girls varsity basketball team last year, and they improved across the year, but when they first got started, you have a number of players who have not played outside of MRH youth sports. So I do think that there's a difference between the focus for the youth sports and also the focus for the coaches that are hired, as Katie shared about being competitively posted so that we can get the most qualified.
Oh, no, definitely like
candidates.
still having a dedicated coach. I'm just talking about somebody that can run drills, or somebody that can be like, all right, we're going to have, you know, not everybody can be everywhere at once. Like for track is an excellent example. I mean, you've got however many different events going on at a time. You know, you've got, they usually have the planned workouts, like, okay, sprinters go do this workout, field go do this workout, or whatever. Just from my own experience, you know, growing up, I mean, I know that parents, like, just being there on the field, just kind of keeping things moving can be a benefit.
Or not.
Or not.
I'm going to be honest. You don't want me out on the. I'm going to be honest. I think I probably would be. I met my first MRH parent from the elementary school, and it was during COVID, and I was yelling like a mad woman with my son on the soccer team who had just scored a goal on her son. So with that, I was like, oh yeah. So I think yes, they could volunteer. I would probably have some concerns, particularly if you're talking about interactions and the challenges that could occur from that. But I will say that I have, for the most part, observed pretty much all of our practices, and I think the coaches do a phenomenal job. Actually, the girls softball team is looking pretty solid this year, so I'm excited to get to some games for those of you who are interested. But I do think, to your point, Katie, we have to look at that, because I think when I looked at the initial proposal that was submitted, and again, Ms. Noby did all the lift, she did it. And so when I looked at it, I was like, oh, we have some problems. I will also say that we need to revisit our athletics handbook to talk about processes and procedures in regards to what you're asking. If a particular team decreases, or how are we allocating the coaches, because when I looked and saw that we had 13 baseball players with 3 coaches, I'm like, I would have moved a position. You know, I'm always thinking about how do we reallocate funds or people, or eliminate in some cases when we find that there is not a need. So please give us some time to work through that. I know Mr. Davenport is working alongside of Ms. Huffman to create a 5-year plan, and that also includes potentially integrating sports into the middle school to begin to allow opportunities for our kiddos there.
And it is my understanding, I have, Josh, I do have kids who participate in our sports and after-school activities. Our coaches are amazing, whether it's for chess, debate, theater, baseball, volleyball.
Oh, no,
soccer.
I have no doubt.
So
Yeah,
they ask when they want help.
Oh, I see.
And they're very good about asking it, and quite honestly, this year, parents are gonna be asked to help fundraise.
Yeah, fundraise and concession stand.
Concession stand.
So parents who want to be involved, we would really love for you to be a part of that booster club. That's where, you know, I think the heavy lift for the parents can really lie, because that would help us out a lot. Because when you go to our concession stand, you see the same faces. They're here every single time. And they're here every single sport, you know, so they are very dedicated, and we appreciate them. Of course we do, you know, but I think allowing them to watch their own kid would be helpful as well.
So can we, before we look at extra duty contracts for coaches for next year, look at our numbers again and see how our ratios are tracking? Yes. Obviously, we still have kids signing up. Some of the sports haven't started yet. I think we want to keep an eye on the shift in numbers, if there is any. If we have more participation, we want to make sure that we've got adequate coverage. So if that's something we can track for prior to approving next year's extra duty contracts, I think we'd appreciate that.
Study item, not voting tonight? Because is this something, because This would be something that we would want to, if we approve, to implement before girls soccer in the spring.
Yes, it would
So
come
we
back.
have a little bit of time, but
Yes.
not.
So it comes back for action at the September board meeting.
Okay.
Yep.
And I guess I would also invite, like, if in the interim, if there are any other issues like that, that pop up, you know, just to speak up, to let the staff know, or the coaches know, or the students, or whatever, you know, if there was another interest in any of this while we are examining it, like if they want another type of club, or hey, there's a big interest in like fencing or something, then, you know, just to let us know.
Talk to your building leaders, they'll let us know.
Yes, talk to your building leaders. That's what I meant.
Thank you, Mr. Dowd.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Item 4.05, Program Evaluation for HR and School Climate with Dr. Ambrose Phillips.
I apologize to the board, but I'm going to actually sit for this presentation. I've been kind of getting over some illness, and so I think if I sit, I will definitely make it through the presentation without coughing. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen of the board, community members, parents, and staff. I am Shonda Ambrose Phillips, the Assistant Superintendent of Human Resources, and I am here to present the Climate and Culture Exit Survey Report. So this report actually has three actual purposes or goals, and the first is to understand the rationale for staff departures. So really thinking about the factors that contribute to why staff members actually exit our system, so those direct or indirect factors that contribute to them leaving. Also to understand employment practices from the employee's perspective. It's really important for us to understand how our practices are experienced or impacted by the employee. And so this gives us an opportunity from their lens to share their story. The last is to develop those next steps to improve employment satisfaction and strengthen positive workplace relationships. So we value our employee. We often say value that employees are our largest and our biggest resource and asset in the district. And so it's really important for us to retain them and to make sure that we are focusing on improving their experiences both personally and professionally in MRH. So this is a rewarding workplace for them to actually live and grow and stay. The next slide really talks about the strategic plan, the alignment that it has. So under the section of For Our People, you will see specifically the goal is to create a positive culture and climate for all employees, which will lead to better outcomes for students and the community. And if you look up above that, it really discusses our focus of recruiting and retaining a diverse workforce. And so one of our goals is not only to improve the retention rate, but to increase the diversity. And retaining the staff that we have in place is one of the biggest ways that we can do that. And so I'm not going to read that to you, but there's some other bullet points down at the bottom of that to show you the tie-in and the connection to the MSIP 6 and also the alignment to our strategic plan. The next slide is just MRH retention statistics. And so on this particular slide, I wanted to share with you the 21-22 school year and the 22-23 school year. The prior school year of 2021 is not included because honestly that's the pandemic. That data would be very skewed. There are a lot of factors that contributed to why that data would not really be accurate to be able to present for you tonight, but I did give you these 2 school years to show what the retention rates were, and it's broken down in different designations. So you have the buildings, you also have specifically, you'll see the ebbs and flows of the data, and there are a lot of factors that contribute to why people stay and why people leave in those particular settings, and we have pulled some of that data out. If you look at the 21-22 school year, our district rate for our retention rates is about 86% when you factor those numbers together, and when you look at the 22-23 school year, it's about 84%. The next slide just compares MRH. This information is pulled from DESE, and so some comparable districts that we can look at to see what their 3-year retention rate are, and then also you see the state average. So this is something that is not only impacting Maplewood Richmond High School District, but you can see regionally lots of districts are experiencing turnover and attrition, and also it is something that is a focus for the state of Missouri and actually nationally as well, to be able to retain individuals in the teaching profession and to keep the individuals that we have here. So this is a lot of work that is happening throughout the region. On the next slide, I wanted to give you some background on the historical perspectives of exit interviews. And so exit interviews, as far as I can tell, have been implemented in MRH since at least 2014. So I can go back and find data from that implementation process up until that time. It's kind of fragmented prior to that, so I think it was actually happening, but I can't find the evidence to support that it was happening across the board. Those surveys were in-person exit interviews with the Assistant Superintendent of Human Resources, so they would be invited in to be able to have this exit interview in person. And then the questions were read, and the responses were then scribed or transcribed, and additional responses were emailed in some cases occasionally. I saw a couple of evidence where individuals, after the exit interview occurred, provided some additional feedback. This process was not necessarily codified for duplication, so it wasn't a standardized process, and the process was not really articulated in a logical manner where you could go back and replicate it so with fidelity. And so that was the process of it. On the next slide, I have included the questions. These were the 5 questions that were posed from the 14-15 school year and the 15-16 school year. And so individuals would respond to these questions, and that information was typed out in a narrative. On the next slide, it shows you the questions that were actually posed from the 2016-17 school year to the 2021-22 school year. I attached the questions because there were more of them as a part of this presentation. So these are the actual 5 categories that the questions actually were pulled from: general, climate of the organization, training and support, customer service, and other. And it seemed to be like a series of questions under these topics that were posed to specific people. So it wasn't always the same questions every time, but the questions are under that theme, and so they do follow a logical pattern. And again, if you look at the presentation, you have access to what those questions were. In the 2023 school year, so this past school year, we changed the process. The questions were modified from the previous school year. You also have those questions as an attachment to this presentation. There's an exit survey, and we also sent out stay surveys, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. But it was really important to transition the process to Google. I wanted individuals to be able to have an opportunity to respond in their own, in their own voice, and using, the responses, keying in those responses, and not me reading back and paraphrasing and trying to come up with what I believe they said. So it's really important for us to document that. And so those exit interviews were mailed to staff members who submitted a letter of resignation or retirement. That was prior to June 30th, and so if they retired or they resigned prior to the year, they were sent out this Google link and asked to complete the survey. And in that survey, it encouraged them to come in for an in-person interview, because oftentimes I would read information in there and it lended itself to a conversation. There were additional questions that I wanted to pose to be able to get a better understanding. And so things weren't lost in interpretation. And some individuals did come in, and in addition to the paper survey, they actually completed in-person survey, exit survey interviews. Multiple invitations were extended, and so my team, if people did not complete the surveys, they emailed them again, and they emailed them again, and encouraged them to do so. Again, it is a volunteer process for them to complete the survey, but we certainly encourage them. We sent them out early and often. The results will be aggregated. Results will be shared with stakeholders, and so we shared some of that information with the principals and also with administrators who work directly with employees. If it was timely, we felt like it was something that we definitely needed to share early. And then also this presentation is provided to the board tonight as well. I also kind of want to state some of that information was also important in terms of having conversations with our support staff forum and also CBTF, and that was another difference between the exit surveys this year. We not only provided exit surveys to our certified staff, but our support staff as well. So it was really important for me to understand, again, turnover is also a factor for our classified or our support staff members, and we want to retain all of our employees. And so that was another deviation, if you will, from past practice. So these are the exit survey results based upon each year, and you can see the responses that we have had. The 21-22 school year, I am certain that those survey exit interviews existed. I cannot find where they, when I spoke to my staff, it's my understanding that they did actually happen, that there are some people who actually did come in for in-person exit interviews. I just don't have any evidence of that. And I think it was also bumped up against my transition. I was transitioning into the district and my predecessor was also leaving. And so I don't actually know those numbers, but I do have faith that some exit interviews probably did happen in person. On the next slide, out of the 18 individuals who completed the exit interview, this is how it breaks down demographically. There are 9 female and 9 men. You can see the race of the employees. Also, you can see the locations and the departments from which those individuals actually completed those exit interviews. And again, some of them actually followed up with in-person interviews as well. There were 24 staff members who did not return to MRH who were certified staff members, and so out of the 24 staff members that were certified, there were approximately 3 administrators and 21 who were certified teachers, and so teachers, counselors, librarians, that's who would make up the additional certified piece. 6 individuals out of the 24 were retirees, 2 were on the certified side who actually completed the exit interview, and then 2 were on the support side who completed the exit interview. And the tenure actually ranged, when you think about certified staff, from 5 to 25 years, 5 months, excuse me, to 25 years. When I add support staff, it was 28 years for one of our retirees. And so it was a lot of rich information and data that they did actually provide for us. The in-person interviews that were scheduled, those were scheduled during mutually agreeable times, and so individuals would tell me when they were available. Sometimes that happened in my office, sometimes I would meet them in their buildings, and sometimes we would choose just an alternate location. The one administrator that actually did complete an exit interview with me, that actually happened over winter break, so school wasn't even in session. So it just depends on their availability. But it was really it was informational and informative for me to be able to have a discussion and dialogue with them in addition to the actual paper surveys. The next slide just really gives you a snapshot of some of the questions. Again, I provided the entire survey to you as an attachment, but these are some questions that really bubbled up and were really important to me. One of the reasons why I wanted to do stay surveys is I wanted to make sure that we are proactive in Maplewood, Richmond Heights, and we are actually looking at the factors that contribute to why people are staying in our system, and we're trying to replicate that success, find the things that we are doing well, and do more of that. And then those individuals who are committed to stay into MRH really will provide a lot of feedback to help us continue to grow. And so I want to know what do you most like about this company? What do you like about MRH? And so some of that information is there in terms of the resources, the innovation. Of course, everyone loves our students and our families and their colleagues. What do you like least about the job and or the company? And some of the responses there were either no complaints. Some individuals definitely talked about the competitive salary, work schedules for our hourly employees, the work-life balance, things like central office and a lack of trust came up. communication with my supervisors or lack of support from administrators in no particular order, but these were things, common themes that came up. Again, I'm trying to make sure as much as possible that I share the information, but also make sure that in the process that there's confidentiality and people feel free to come and to be able to provide feedback. And so no identifying information would be a part of this process, but just to give you those things. And that last category is what comments do you have about the district's salary and benefits? And you will see lots of different responses, and this is a mixture of support staff and certified staff, and people are in different positions. The insurance was a common theme that people felt like it was excellent. Some individuals really wanted our prior experience from other districts or settings, if it was support staff, like work or similar work to be weighed more heavily in the compensation. There were other things that came up in terms of the salary increases were a great improvement. Lots of individuals who were definitely appreciative for the increases, and some individuals felt like it was really long overdue, but again, that was one of the things. And just based upon our discussion tonight, extra duty pay schedule is inequitable. There were a lot of conversations about specific extra duties, and some individuals are being paid more for specific positions as opposed to others. And so maybe an audit on extra duties to just make sure that when you're thinking about the number of students that are in those programs, when you're thinking about the conditions and the type of work that people are encountering, just making sure that we're equitable in the compensation. Not going to read it all, you have that, but those are some things that actually stood out for me. This is actually just a snapshot of this particular question and the responses, and you can see individuals had an opportunity to check all that applied. And so you see retirement, they kind of changed it a couple of different ways. I reached the rule of 80, retiring probably, I think it's sicko fishing, but retirement, so it's in there a couple of different times because there are several people who actually did retire as a part of this process that completed the survey. But there are other things that really stand out. The number one factor here is company culture. It also talks about the conditions, the working conditions or circumstances in which people are working under. And so it is an opportunity for them to expound upon that later on in the survey. But these are factors that are contributing to individuals seeking alternative or alternate employment from the district. The next slide is just the position fill rate. So I discussed that we had 24 certified positions that were open this year, and also some support staff positions. Those positions are filled at this point in time. When you look at ECC, they're at 100%, elementary is at 100% fill rate, middle school and high school, all of the certified teaching positions and those individuals that have direct contact with students are filled. We added a position as an MTSS coach position this year, and that posted a little bit late in the season. And so we are in the process now of filling that position for probably the spring, because we want to make sure that we have a really rich candidate pool. And so that position is actually 0.5 for the middle school and 0.5 for the high school. And so that's why you see the designation of 97% and 98% there. And so what are the next steps? Where do we go from here? In terms of this exit survey, we want to continue having these exit surveys and stay surveys. I think it's, again, important to survey individuals on both ends, and so we'll continue to share that data, whether it's through CBTF, our support staff forum, our teacher leaders to the board, or directly with those actual administrators and principals. The data will continue to be shared, and we'll analyze and determine some best practices to address it. We have collaborated with EdPlus, and then also MOASPA, which is the HR organization for the state. So a couple of years ago, EdPlus, I thought, sent out a survey to actually asked all the districts in the state of Missouri if they actually conducted exit surveys, how those surveys were actually compiled, and what their response rates were. And so Dr. Steve Griggs, who is the CEO of Ed Plus, actually pushed that out for me again. One of the things that came up, I know, during a board meeting is about third parties. There are no districts in the state of Missouri that I've been able to identify that actually use a third party to actually conduct exit surveys. That is something that we certainly can explore, but at this point in time, there's not a district that is utilizing that method. But again, we want to make sure that we understand the best practices, that we look at our survey processes, and then also that we're really factored into the response rates and trying to increase the number of individuals who respond to the surveys, because the data, again, is what helps us to grow. We also want to review the survey instrument for potential improvements. I've thought about, should there be a Likert scale? Should there be additional things that we can either add or things that we might need to take away? And so I think going back to our employee groups and having some feedback from them on what is missing and what could potentially be different about the survey is a good first start or next step. We will continue to monitor staff retention and improve climate and culture. That is the goal. We certainly don't want to be in a perpetual cycle of hiring, and we want to retain. We want to actually be able to recruit talented workforce and to retain those individuals here in the district, and identify opportunities to implement the feedback and develop revised system-wide improvement goals. So that is the reason for the work, is to be able to input those improvement goals to grow. The last thing on that slide is to analyze and share the results and implement strategies for improvement, which we will continue to do. And then on the last slide there, we have the next step is also district-wide staff principal surveys. And so not only doing those exit surveys when individuals are leaving our district and stay surveys for the folks who are staying, but to actually administer some principal surveys to get feedback in the building.
Can I interject on that one? So one of the buildings this year actually had principal surveys. And so with principals, I meet with them in collaboratives. I talk about that frequently. After the data was actually collected, I met with the administrative team and unpacked the data and actually identified action steps with them with accountability measures, and then met with several of the teacher leaders in this particular building as a means to get feedback around, outside of the opportunities, what are some things that went well? Because I think sometimes we can focus on the things that don't go well. So it was the enlightening conversation, and what was beneficial for me from the administrative team that actually engaged in that conversation was that it was beneficial for them to get a different form of feedback from their teachers outside of the climate and culture survey feedback, because there's a difference. The feedback from the principal survey is aligned to principal standards. So it's around instruction, it's around teacher support, it's around building systems and things of that nature. So this particular survey will be administered to all building principals this upcoming year. So not just the one, and that is a way to ensure equity for all buildings. And I can talk to this slide because these are actually items that.
Can I make a clarifying question? When you say administered to all principals, you mean they're administered to all staff in those, all teachers in those buildings about their principal, and these are anonymous surveys that are given to all staff to give feedback on the principal.
Yes, and I do not hold the survey. So there is an external person who builds the survey. We will use the same survey that was used last year, and once the survey is closed, I said, please send me the aggregated and disaggregated data. And so the principals only get their data. So it's administered in a way where if there are multiple administrators in the building, the individual who's being evaluated, they can select that person. So when I'm able to look at both the aggregate and the disaggregate, I can tell where the feedback is coming. So for one of the particular buildings, what I found is that the feedback was germane to a person. However, it is a collective unit. So thank you for that clarifying question. The second piece is the development of building improvement plans. This is the first district that I've been a part of where buildings did not have building improvement plans nor goals. So last year, principals presented to the board their goals. This year, they actually have building improvement plans that are aligned to the strategic plan, and those plans include goals around teacher retention. And so I have follow-up conversations. Members of my team, depending on the section of the strategic plan that they are monitoring and managing, will also provide support to those buildings. Implement professional development plans for principals. So what's interesting is that there is the belief that certain systems and things were in place. Now, principals do not have professional development plans, and they have not had them. So this year, those will be implemented. So the goal for this is, if there have been pre-identified opportunities for individuals, the plan not only holds me accountable as the superintendent who evaluates them to ensure that they get adequate support, but it allows the principal to identify strategies and support that they need, and allows that to be monitored over time. What is not known to our community is that I actually administer each year a 360 survey to my direct reports, and that information is included in my evaluation, and I set goals in regards to the information that's received. And so the feedback cycle around growth is not only for building principals, teachers, it is also for the superintendent. And the last piece, which I'm excited about, is what I'll do with our teacher association teams. And so we have teacher leader meetings, which I don't know if community is aware of. It's a cross-section of the district. It includes NEA reps, and those items that come through are germane to items that might be viewed as district-wide items, but it is not specific to culture. And so if you saw on the previous slide that Dr. Ambrose Phillips identified, the 11 participants who did complete the survey identified district culture as being an issue. So the goal for my monthly meetings is to talk with our teacher association reps, both MSTA and NEA, to discuss strategies and other ways that we can include in the district to improve culture. And while it's not on this slide, as a part of the board engagement, the board members will be also meeting with the teachers with the MSTA or MENEA reps. And so district culture is critical for us. And I think the belief is that we like hiring new people. We don't. I watch Dr. Ambrose Phillips, I watch administrators, I watch teachers who volunteered their time unpaid to sit in interviews. It is not an easy feat. And when you get late into the hiring season, when you want to fill positions to ensure that we have quality candidates in the classroom. So we are working to improve culture. Please know that. And I am always open to have conversation with members of our community regarding the steps that we're taking. Dr. Ambrose Phillips, I'm going to hand it back to you.
Actually, that is the end of our presentation. So what questions might I be able to answer for you?
I've got a couple of questions about climate and culture, and I know that it's part of our strategic plan, but it seems so subjective that, is there any milestone that we can point to, like, okay, policies are, these are the policies that are evenly enforced or whatever. It just seems like, when people say that, oh, I'm upset about the culture, at workplaces where if you didn't get your coffee served to you, then that would be an upsetting culture. And so it doesn't seem that doesn't mean anything to me. Like, I don't understand what these words mean, or how we improve something that's going to mean something different to everybody.
That's a great question. So I'm going to first couch it in organizational change. So think about it. You had 2 superintendents who have had a very long stay in the district, and they both were internal individuals. I am the first external superintendent to come into the district. And so when we think about the successes that MRH has had, and then also this idea of organizational change, any bit of change, even if it's not bad change, is scary. So it's not that people are not open to change, but it also is about relationships. And so during opening day, I talked about connections and community. That is a real thing. And I think that the perceptions of our staff is their reality, whether we can codify it or name it. I do agree that sometimes some of the items are subjective, but out of the surveys and my poring over the feedback that I've received, some of the things are real. So for one of the buildings, the lack of systems, the lack of feedback being observed was a real thing. Was I happy with that? Absolutely not. Did I fix it? It will be fixed this year. So I think the things, when I sorted through the feedback, where there was a list that was given from a group of teachers who met individually, I did go through to sort through to say what are actionable things that we as a district need to modify. And some of the things that I felt, to your point, that were subjective, I moved them off the table, and I will continue to lead and develop relationships with the hope that people open their hearts and their minds to the work. It is not personal. So there is no way outside of the surveys that we complete where we have individuals to, because everybody has a bad day. So somebody can click a survey, they may not like a person, and that person then taking the survey will put that they hate everything about the district and the work that's being done. For me, the value is engaging our people and further understanding how we actually right-size the ship, knowing that it will continue to be and reflect opportunities where culture is not satisfiable to, as you mentioned. So I don't think it's the policy. I think it's people, one, understanding where the district is going. I think the approval of the strategic plan is very clear. The management oversight teams, which will be implemented, will be very clear. The role and opportunities for participation, a huge piece of what I heard. And so outside of what Dr. Ambrose Phillips outlined, I do post checks in buildings. I meet with staff members 7 in the morning for coffee. If they want to meet after work, I meet with parents, family members. So the feedback is all different. And so it's my responsibility to work through and with my teams to ensure that they're supporting their people the way that they need to. An example of that would be just some of the work that Dr. Dietrich is doing now with the operations department and how fragmented they were from a relationship standpoint, and feeling valued and heard and having an opportunity to be treated like professionals. So I do think that we have work to do, and it's not just work under my leadership, it's work that probably needed to be done prior to my arrival, but I am here and I own it. So I'm hoping that once we get the new surveys done, the principal surveys that will be administered and some of the work that we've identified here will help move the needle. But I'm going to be very clear, not only to our employees, our families, that we have to open our minds to trust and understand that it is not going to get better if we are not collaborating together. The work is a team effort. So I do think that there are things, I don't think that there's a way for us to capture specifically to your question, because it is, surveys are very subjective and it's based on what a person feels.
I guess what I'm looking for is some sort of statement or some sort of commitment to, these are our policies, these are that they're going to be administrated fairly, that we are going to treat our staff, which I'm not saying that you don't, I'm just saying that, you know, that everybody will understand that everybody's going to be treated with dignity and respect, that we expect everybody to be treated with dignity and respect, and that is our culture.
So we do have a policy, GBCB, that talks about that, but I'm just being honest, like a person's perception of being treated with respect.
Well, yeah.
And I think that for me, just because I know in terms of some of the interviews, whether it was in person or whether it was the Google Doc, and having them actually complete the electronic survey, one of the reasons why I wanted to meet with people when they said, I don't feel supported, one of the questions I asked, tell me what that looks like. What does that sound like? What does that feel like for you? Because support can look different to each individual. And there were things where maybe if there was a situation with a supervisor and an employee where the supervisor is telling me that I'm doing these things, and they list these different actions that they have done to support that employee. But if the employee does not feel that that is support, if the employee feels like, well, maybe that feels punitive. So I think that part of it is just being in a situation where there's some common language, and sometimes there are actions that individuals are doing to provide guidance and support to employees, and depending upon how that lands, especially if it's something that feels corrective to them, or maybe that is something in the past that they have not experienced before, then it is still very difficult, I think, for them to hear. So There was a level of subjectivity certainly in the surveys where, again, you could tell that there was a situation, and so the responses based upon all of the questions kind of were geared towards this particular interaction that they've had with maybe one person. But there was a lot of information, whether it's the leave policy, whether I think about our calendar committee and some of the changes that we made there for individuals leaving because they wanted to be on the same schedule as their kids, or if we think about some of the breaks, there was a lot of things that we were able to implement within the survey, through the survey process, and finding this data that we could quickly address. That I do think that is twofold. You have things that are tangible that you can use, and that you can hopefully put some changes in place to be able to impact employees in a positive way. And then there are some things that I think are very subjective, and you might not actually be able to get to a resolution that is supportive on both sides.
Well, I guess, to follow that up, just to be fair to the district, that some of the data that you collected was from people that possibly were on PIPs or possibly, I mean, I know we can't get into the specifics of it, but some of the people that may have felt that the climate and culture was not appropriate, there might have been a specific reason for why they may have been receiving negative or correction, or whatever you want to call it, coaching opportunities or whatever.
So correct, true. I can't really get into the specifics. I will tell you, we don't give exit surveys to individuals who are terminated, but they either resign or they're retired. And so those are the individuals who would take the exit survey. But it is very dependent upon their individual experiences on how they might respond.
So can I ask, so we have the strategic plan, and it's a 5-year plan, and it is sort of the end-all be-all benchmark. And then we have our goals for our district that are also, we have perfection, we have less perfection, but we don't live in black and white, we live in the middle. And so how do we judge where we're at and that we're moving forward in the coming months? Because we don't want to come around next August and be exactly where we're at right now. So because it is sort of, climate and culture is a little ethereal, a little abstract. How do we make sure that we're moving the needle's going the right way?
So for me, I would say looking at the types of conversations that we're having in the teacher leader meetings, and I think when we ended the school year, anybody who knows me knows that I don't have an issue with sharing like my thoughts, and I shared with the folks on the Zoom that I felt like the meetings were transactional, meaning I have a question and we're typing in a response, and I'm like, we're not even talking. Like, so the work is going to take time. We're going to have people committed. But to answer your question, through teacher leader, through my hope is the conversations that I'm having with the union reps, but we won't know. So we'll continue to administer the climate and culture surveys twice a year. So those are our benchmarks. So we'll have the first one using a different tool than DESI. We don't have to wait, and then we can have cleaner data, and then the data will give us information that we can respond to in a quicker manner. So the turnaround for the DESI survey, we administer it, it'd be a month, 2 months, and then you get 90 pages full of stuff that you're trying to comb through, because they don't actually group the themes for you so that you see that, resources. I think one of the ones that I pulled out for staff was resources, and I had more questions around that, and I was talking to Dr. Ambrose Phillips. I said, like focus groups or something, because if you're saying I need more resources, so an example, 2 things came out of a conversation that I had with a staff member from the ECC, and the person said, I want to feel appreciated by you. And I said, well, let's unpack that a bit. I said, my role is to support principals. I said, so it sounds like you want to hear your principal show appreciation for you. Let's talk about, what that looks like from my vantage point as the superintendent. And so we went into the conversation, and it was a 3-hour conversation. It was fantastic. But what was found was when I visit classrooms, and I'm using myself as an example, language like it's sterile, it doesn't feel genuine. We are trying to improve outcomes for kids. And so I'm not going in looking at teachers. It is my way to see if my principals understand how to coach and provide support. It is not my role to give feedback to teachers. Now, it is the responsibility for principals to give feedback to their teachers. It wasn't happening. So basically what was happening, I'm walking in, of course, it's kind of scary. You got the administrative team going in with the superintendent, no feedback. So that is a concern. And so when I meet with my principals, that was good feedback. Okay, when you leave, if I'm in your building, you have to give feedback, and I give them feedback in a particular manner. I have a framework for that. And I give them feedback in the same framework. And so it wasn't happening. So I think, you know, to your question, we can continue to take the survey, and, you know, the goal is to see improvement. But a lot of the culture piece is, for me, it's qualitative. I talked about the beginning of this year and the feel and the energy and the momentum that was felt versus last year. So we can do the surveys, that's one data point. We can look at retention data, like you said, it's another, but another piece that we want to monitor that I'm interested in once we figure out how to clean up the Kelly Services data is staff attendance rates, not professional development, but looking at absenteeism rates as what Katie was talking about. So there are a number of factors that you can look at when you begin to talk about culture. If people enjoy coming to work, you will see lower absenteeism rates. And so as we continue to give the updates under the MSIP-6 report, you'll see whatever data points that we have, or even if it's a meeting and something comes out of that meeting, that information will be shared. I broke it.
And I would just say, I really feel like the culture that we, as a board, have established that we want to see is reflected in core values that are in the training. And we're going to have a tool that aligns with those core values. And these aren't the only core values that a district could have. We have, obviously, you know, dozens of districts around the region who have some similar things, but maybe not quite. And again, there's a fit for people wherever they want to fit, right? So I think that's the other aspect of this, that this is the ideal that we've sketched out, and you know, integrity is one of those things. So yes, it is subjective. If I feel like, you know, my sense of belonging, but I should be able to articulate to Dr. Ambrose Phillips or my supervisor, you know, this is why I'm not feeling a sense of belongingness. And, you know, you can get that feedback sort of thing. So again, we've got just some explicitness about the work that needs to happen, clearly. Speaking of explicitness, I am wondering about access to the raw data. I know historically, we have received the scribed, you know, interview notes with, you know, identifying information redacted. I think that would be helpful while also acknowledging that it is a point in time. I also am not seeing as much emphasis on the stay interview portion of this in the presentation. So should we expect to see some more, or is that information being shared with some internal team that is going to do something with it?
We have, so we pulled a lot of information from the state survey and the state interviews. Dr. Jameson, for the purpose of just trying to make sure that we had a very full board meeting tonight, and to condense the presentation, really wanted to focus on the exit interviews. There were 37 people who actually completed the state survey or set for in-person interviews. And so I had a lot of people that actually did provide information and feedback on the survey instrument itself. There were 37 individuals, but those conversations and the state interviews provided a lot of information. I can share the raw data with the board. I certainly don't have a problem doing that on both sides, the exit interview and also the state interview. So that certainly is not a problem. But I found it really good, despite the fact that we had a very busy interview schedule and interview season. I try to have an open door policy, And so given the fact that this is my first year in MRH, but people were willing to come and share and provide feedback and complete the surveys, I know that there are a lot of survey instruments that we ask teachers and staff members to do, and they already have a very full plate. And so the fact that they actually did complete it was really important to me, and I'm going to read it. And as much of it that we can actually put into practice quickly, just kind of think about the quick wins. We're going to make sure that we do those things. I brought things to Dr. Jameson and said, hey, this came up in the state survey, and I think we need to address it. They have a valid point. I've brought things to different principals or supervisors to say, hey, this came up, and I really want you to look at this because this is something that there's a pattern here, and I'm not sure what's going on, but if multiple people tell me the same thing, then I think there is a common denominator here, and it warrants some type of responsiveness from us to be able, if we ask people for feedback, we have a duty and a responsibility to do something with it. And so I think we've had lots of conversations about that as well, and I definitely don't mind sharing that information with you in its full entirety.
I'm almost afraid to ask this question, but part of this was a lack of trust with the central office. Like, can we unpack that? What does that mean? What does that look like?
I think even if you look at some of the fluctuations and transitions from the district, one of the things that I found, and I can drill down a little bit deeper to see the connection, but it definitely did show up in some of the survey data that if the leader left, let's just say at a building, then I think that there were some patterns of individuals also who there is a higher percentage rate of individuals leaving that particular building. So you probably would see it in the different dynamics for elementary, or then the next year maybe it's still some fluctuation, or high school or whatever have you. So I think part of it is that piece, that there's some pattern or there's some connection between the leadership, the organizational change, and I think specific relationships that people might have with a specific individual caused them to respond in the manner of which they did. And so they didn't necessarily, some of the data is identifying and some of it really isn't. It's just central office. And so again, if there's not an opportunity for me to have some additional dialogue, it's hard to interpret what that means.
I have an example. So in one of the buildings, there was a conversation about the master schedule. And paraphrasing, it was like we couldn't get the number of minutes which DESE requires for teachers to have for plan time, which is a requirement, because central office won't let us do it. And my response was the superintendent nor central office builds the master schedule. That is a building level function. So when you begin to talk about us versus them, if there is not trust, I will continue to say the same thing. It doesn't matter what central office says if the messaging coming out of the building does not reflect the messaging that we're giving, then it is a us versus them. So that's just like one concrete example, and I have many more. And so, through the conversations regarding whether it's individuals who have chosen to meet with me or have other conversations, other things come out, and I'm like, well, that's just not true. And you give the evidence for that, and it feels like a perpetual cycle of trying to prove a difference. I'll give you another example. Employment of an individual who said that they were employed by the district, and somebody did some vetting and said the person wasn't. The person had the contract showing that they were. And so again, that's another us versus them. And so, it's tit for tat, and I'm being very transparent. That was one for me. The conversation was around me not being hired by MRH. Anybody knows educators were professional hoarders. I have the contract that shows that I was. But my point to that is that's an example of one saying that the administration is not being honest. And so, again, because I typically, and you asked the question, so I'm responding, I don't respond. I could have posted it on Facebook, I could have put it on Twitter. that is not how I lead. And so, that's an example when you begin to talk about the us versus them. And so because there's a lack of trust, because there isn't, this idea of relationship building and, again, connections and community, we can spend all night talking about this. It really is about, I've been thinking long and hard about this. This idea that we love the community. If we love the community, we love the kids, we're going to collaborate despite differences in order to ensure that they are successful. That's the bottom line.
So, just to be clear, there is no us versus them. We are all...
Correct. Thank you for pointing that out.
We're all in it together.
Yes. Or at least that's what
I often
would
say
like
there are
to-
no big I's and little U's. And so, again, whether it's the superintendent, whether it's our certified staff, whether it's support, classified, whether it doesn't matter. It takes all of us to be in this together to make sure that our students are successful and that, again, the district thrives. So no, there's no us versus them mentality.
Well, I think to that point, if there exists that perception anywhere within our staff ranks, it's incumbent upon all of us to face it. And I think the more involvement and collaboration we can have in developing the tools that are going to allow us to measure this, and I think this stay in the exit survey data will be really helpful to the team that is identifying our climate and culture survey. Helping us pick a tool that can create a benchmark from the outset that takes into consideration the feedback that's been given to us, both positive and negative, can help give shape to the way that survey is developed and administered. I think we have tools at our disposal based on the feedback that we've gotten to help shape the way that we collect future feedback. I think that will be critical to building trust and the fact that our building personnel are sitting on those committees and giving their feedback, and the more that we can encourage them to be honest in that feedback in terms of what needs to be shaped, what needs to be asked, and what objective we're trying to meet in getting that survey feedback, I think is absolutely critical to this process.
I think also to that end, having a clear set of expectations, policies, that these are not suggestions, this is what the administration expects, this is what the building administrators should be doing. That there are no fiefdoms. It's all, it's all part of one big system.
Thank you, Dr. Zambers Phillips. It was a very thorough, very thoughtful presentation.
Item 5.01, our July financial statements.
Good evening again. I'll go through the July financial statement summary. The full financial statements are there in the agenda for you to look at and to feature. I'll go through the high points here. As we move on to the revenue, you'll notice here that our local revenue makes up the majority of the revenues that the district receives each year. The local revenues are composed of revenues from our fee-based services, being preschool, Discover Club, and also school lunch and breakfast, as well as our local taxpayer funds, which make up the majority of the 66%. So it's always, I always like to call out the generosity of our community for providing the district with the resources it needs to do the amazing work we do. So to that end, July is sort of a boring month when it comes to financial statements, honestly, because it's the first month of the fiscal year. There's not a whole lot going on. You'll see more as the months continue. But in July, we've received just a little bit of revenue, right there around $688,000, $89,000 and higher, because timing is critical. We have a cash-based system here, so we have to record the revenue when it's received. So if we get it after June 30, it gets booked in July, and it ends up revenue that we weren't budgeting for. So that kicks our numbers up a little bit. But we did get some federal and state revenue that didn't make it into the previous fiscal year. Moving on to the expenditure, you can see that 77% of our expenditures go to our human resource, as they should. couple of points of clarification. There were some, in our budget for the fiscal 24, there were some anomalies that needed some further explanation, so I'd like to take care of that here. Superintendent's salary and benefits budgets have increased. It was a significant increase in the budget over this year from last year. And that's because we coded a new position to the federal programs, which is the federal programs coordinator, to the office of the superintendent. We were talking about where that more appropriately needs to be coded as far as accounting. But that is the reason why that position looks askew. Also, the business office salary and benefits budgets have increased due to the restructuring of the CFO position. So prior to CFO, my title was Director of Technology and Business Services. Therefore, my salary was split amongst two departments. As the org chart did change the job responsibilities, though the entirety of the salary for the CFO position is now on the business services budget. So that again skews the data. It's much in the same way that I don't include the bond revenues or expenses in the regular financial statements because it skews the numbers so greatly we can't really get a year-to-year comparison that makes much sense, although those numbers are fully recorded in another way. So let's see. Operations salary benefits budgets have increased due to reallocation of positions. So in 22-23, we had a middle school principal. In 23-24, that middle school principal became the director of operations. So those shifts are noticeable when it comes to the numbers moving from one place to another, and this is the explanation thereof.
Chris, would you give me a little bit more on the first bullet? So the budget that we approved for last school year did not include the federal programs coordinator?
It did not make the budget, correct.
Okay. So that was an adjustment that we made.
It was an adjustment we made
early in the school year as that position came on board. Okay.
Yeah, and that's actually an important point. Move on to the next slide there, Chris. So when we think about, when we prepare the fiscal 24, the next year budget, we do a year-to-year comparison. In the budget document specifically, we do a 5-year comparison inclusive of the next fiscal year. When that time comes, due to timing, the numbers you're looking at for the previous fiscal year, or in this case the current fiscal year, is a budget number, not an actual number. Remembering that a budget is what we think or what we plan to happen, but doesn't always happen. The actual is what actually happened. So professional development is actually budgeted to be a bit higher than it was in the prior year. And you can see that I put here a 4-year comparison so you can see the ebb and flow of professional development. Now these will change as a result of district and or building goals, which is important because now that we have a strategic plan, we've done some realignment and are in the process of continuing to realign professional development to both the strategic and to the building plans. Not that they weren't aligned to other district goals in the past, but now that we have that plan, and Dr. Jameson is making a special effort to make sure that the building plans that she spoke to earlier are reflected in our professional development offerings and how we're spending those dollars. Positions, this is another area where I will tell you, tracking positions year over year is difficult. It's just hard. So wanted to clarify just a couple of things. Due to MSIP 6, Chris, skip forward one more slide for me. One more. Here we go. So due to MSIP 6, we did an analysis of our administrator to student ratios in each of our buildings. On the left, you see a schedule that shows the minimum standard students as recommended by the state, and then the recommendation of the state for how many students per administrator, or how many administrators per student, however you want to look at that. We discovered that in middle school we were significantly overstaffed on administration as it relates to students. So we made a couple of strategic changes. One of those was to reduce the FTE, the full-time employment of one of our administrators by 0.5 and reallocate half of that position to the high school. At the same time, we changed the Dean of Students position to a assistant principal / activities and athletics director. As a result, the net impact of that was a reduction of 0.5 at both the high school and the middle school of our administrative FTE. We did that strategically. Go ahead to the next one. And here's the result of all that math. You can see all the different positions we have and the 2-year comparison. And you can see the 0.5 reduction. And if you follow through the columns there, you can see how those happen. Go ahead, Chris. And again, here are the numbers, strategic in that we feel like the changes that we made to the administrative counts of each of the buildings more accurately reflect the recommended standards issued by the state.
And I just want to share that MRH is the only middle school carrying 217 kids that had 2 administrators. Brentwood's middle school, smaller in size, has 1. Other districts that have middle schools with 200 kids only have 1 administrator. And they have either an instructional coach or an MTSS coach that helps with coaching students and some of the other responsibilities.
There's a lot of reasons why splitting that middle school administrator position to the high school makes a lot of sense, especially since the 2 student bodies are in the same physical space, in the same building. Having that person to ease or aid in the transition from grade 8 to grade 9 is really important, and I think it's going to be exciting to see how this unfolds as the year progresses. Okay, after all of those words, here's a couple of numbers. We have the historical view of our operating fund balances, remembering that operating funds is everything except for debt service. Those dollars are set aside specifically. We pull them out, and because we can't spend them on anything else. And here are our operating fund balances. So last year we ended with about a 45% fund balance as a percentage of expenditures, and we are budgeting for 35.7 right now. But we know that budgets are our best laid plans, and we make adjustments to those throughout the year. So I expect this number to wiggle around a little bit as we learn more and get better information as to what our expenses need to be focused on.
And Chris, does that decrease in the fund balance, is that an intentional spend down due to the increases given to staff?
It is. We made a very specific effort this past spring to more adequately compensate both our certificated and non-certificated employees to remain competitive. And I've said this in previous meetings, but I'll say it again. The district has often used the term median, which is the average or the middle of the salaries or wages in the immediate area. Well, we're in a position now where average isn't quite good enough, and we need to start thinking in terms of competitiveness. Are we competitive? Are we able to, number one, attract, and number 2, retain our talented workforce? And if we start feeling that that answer is no, and the data proves that out, then we need to make significant changes. We have not made significant changes to the increases of teachers or support staff for some years. We rebuilt the salary schedule. It took us 3 years to do that. We lost ground in the area as a result of that. We the CBTF, the Compensation Benefits Task Force, made a decision not to drastically change compensation until we normalized and made more equitable the teacher's salary schedule. Once that was done, now we had a firm structure to make those increases that were going to impact everybody in an equivalent way. We've done that. We agreed to move the teacher salaries about 10% over 2 years, depending, give or take. And we did an in-kind increase on support staff. And I will tell you, it's already made a difference. You saw in some of the survey results from Dr. Phillips that folks do feel valued. Money does not make everybody feel valued. It's not the end-all be-all, but there is that spot where compensation does match in someone's perception, their output. So when those inputs and outputs become out of balance, we have a situation where we need to make change. So we're spending this down, a lot of words to answer your question, Dr. J. But we did make an intentional effort to make our salaries and wages more competitive so we can retain and maintain our highly qualified staff. And these are the numbers other questions?
Thank you for providing all that clarification to questions that came forward at our last meeting. It was very thorough, and we appreciate the work you've done on this.
Quite well.
Item 6.01, I wanted us all to give a quick update from our casual subcommittees about the work on norms and protocols. Since it sounds like we're angling to share those with one another at our work session in 2 weeks. So we have feedback on draft 1 of norms. So draft 2 will go into process shortly. Katie or Josh, if you'd like to share about protocols.
Protocols are also in process. Actually have handwritten notes that need to just be uploaded into the Google Doc. We will have those for our work session.
The other 2 items that we will bring forward at the work session are a revised committee proposal. And I think we will also be looking at our board engagement plan to make some final decisions about how we will roll that out in the upcoming school year, since there are some TBDs that we'd like to have resolved, particularly as board members are in meetings with MSTA and MNEA representatives, so we can give a little bit more clarity to that. So thanks everyone for continuing to do all of your retreat-related homework.
In the upcoming change with norms and committees and all that, committees are still meeting. I.e., I had one last night. Do we want an update on that, or is there another spot for that?
It's not on the agenda.
I know it's not on the agenda. I thought I said it.
I would welcome a committee update.
You're so nice. I have to give out some kudos. I am on the Jones Place Committee, and Jones Place, the board and the house parents and volunteers have done quite a bit of work. Thank you, Dr. Dietrich. Thank you, Vince. Thank you, Sandra. Thank you, Scott Boyle. New roof, some drainage fixed, hopefully, fingers crossed. Painting, the house looks phenomenal. The house parents are amazing. We are trying to provide them with lots of support. Sandra, who's, I really, it's just grant extraordinaire, but I'm sure it's something else more official than that, is amazing. We are looking at fundraising, so you're gonna see some stuff. We're gonna ask for some community support in many different ways. Yes, Joe's Place is still going on, and yes, we still need our community support. We'll be very vocal and transparent about how that you can help us moving forward.
I like the QR code at the back to school fair too. It was easy to actually donate as we went around, so that was helpful.
Thank you.
And to confirm, the recommendations for committees that will be brought forward at the next work session will obviously include retaining representation on the Joe's Place Board. That is a priority. 6.02, calendar. In case you didn't get the memo, school starts on Monday, but before that, we have a fantastic new event for our middle school and high school students happening tomorrow night on the field starting at 7 p.m. We also have an elementary school new student barbecue on Saturday, and I feel like there were a couple of other, we've got some supply drop-offs happening at the schools. We've got practice bus runs. Just would continue to encourage all families to stay current on your weekly emails from your building leaders, which are growing more concise and more clear as we get consistency in our communications. Yeah.
Update your paperwork.
Please update your paperwork. Get into Power School. Submit your free and reduced lunch form. The board will have a work session on Thursday, September 7th. Okay. Any other board communications before we move on to our action items? Okay. Item 7.01, construction change orders. Can I get a motion?
Move to approve change orders as presented.
Second?
Second.
Thank you. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. 7.02, Board Policy BBFA.
Move to readopt Board Policy BBFA as presented in order to remain in compliance with the Missouri Ethics Commission.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. 7.03, Board Policies GCBDA, GDBDA, Professional and Support Staff Leaves.
Move to adopt GCBDA and GDBDA as amended.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. 7.04, Bus Routes for the 2023-24 school year.
Move to approve the 2023-2024 bus routes as presented.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. 7.05, FY24 meal prices.
Is there any additions we need to make to this before I might make the motion?
I don't think we need to amend the motion. Most of what we discussed was
Just, okay.
discussion and process-oriented, yeah.
Move to approve the, I have no idea what FY means right in this moment, 24
Fiscal
meal
year.
prices as presented. Thank you. I move to approve the fiscal year 24 meal prices as presented.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. 7.06, can I get a motion to move into executive session?
I move to enter executive session in accordance with section 610.021, subsections 3, 9, and 13, and section 610.022 of the revised statutes of Missouri on August 17, 2023, for the following specific reasons: personnel matters.
Second.
Roll call?
Ms. Goldsmith?
Yes.
Ms. Martinez?
Yes.
Ms. Kaufman?
Yes.
Mr. Miller?
Yes.
Ms. Whitcomb?
Yes. All right. Meeting adjourned at 9:48 PM. We'll take a 5-minute break and reconvene for executive session.
Break